This is a CBC News Special presentation.
More than 100 years ago, a son of Newfoundland and Labrador signed up to serve. He donned his uniform, sailed across the ocean, and was fed into the bloody battlefields of the First World War. The Royal Newfoundland Regiment won praise for courage and valor, but that offered him little protection from an enemy lying in wait. Amid the noise, in the muck of the trenches, perhaps his last thoughts were of a wife or children, perhaps of his mother. Perhaps he was a mere child himself. One thing is certain, he was loved, he was missed, and his is likely one of these 800 names, those whose bodies were never found or identified. Men and boys who were lost twice over. But now, after a long and lonely century buried an ocean away, this son of Newfoundland is finally home. His final resting place beneath the polished granite of his homeland. Today, a people, a province, and a country honor the sacrifice of all who sign up to serve, embodied by Newfoundland and Labrador's unknown soldier. Good morning from St. John's and the Newfoundland National War Memorial. It was dedicated 100 years ago today, a special site of remembrance for the lives lost during the World Wars, the sacrifices of a dominion and a people who were not yet a part of Canada when they signed up to fight. This place is about to become even more special, some say sacred, with the addition today of an unknown soldier who will be laid to rest in an extraordinary ceremony this morning. I'm Heather Hiscox. It is truly my honor to be sharing the next few hours with you during these historic moments. We'll have a number of guests who will help us fully appreciate the significance of what we're about to witness. And you're hearing the music behind me of the Anna sisters as they rehearse for the ceremony to come, singing "Sing You Home." It is really the perfect tone with which to begin this day, because it has already been a weekend of high emotion. The body of the repatriated soldier from the First World War has been lying in state at the province's House of Assembly, which is Confederation Building. And you can see in these pictures, hundreds of people from all across the province came to pay their respects to the one soldier who has now come home. These are live pictures from the Confederation Building. Inside the Confederation Building, there is Premier Andrew Furey and his family as they pay their final respects before the casket. Andrew Furey, you're going to hear, join us as a special guest, our first guest in just a few minutes. Here is Premier, obviously, but he is in the role of next of kin, symbolically representing the family of the unknown soldier. And you're going to hear about that, what that honorific has meant to him, because he's been very moved over the course of the lying in state, over the course of the repatriation from bringing the unknown soldier from France here to St. John's, and that last moment of paying respects inside the Confederation Building, where the casket has been lying in state for 3 days. And you can see the pallbearers and the honor guard waiting to receive it and place it in the hearse to bring it to where I am, which is right in front of that National War Memorial. So the Premier leading his family away. This is a day that has been long in the making, and we have with us today some of our colleagues who've been covering it every step of the way. In fact, I was with Terry Roberts there inside Confederation Building at the end of last week. He's from CBC Newfoundland and Labrador, and Terry knows this story so well, which is not the case, Terry, for maybe some of the people who are watching us this morning outside Newfoundland and Labrador. So part of our day today and our job today, Terry, is going to be to teach people about Newfoundland and Labrador in the First World War, about the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, so they can fully understand, fully appreciate the significance of this unknown soldier. I'll let you begin. Why is this day important, Terry?
Oh, well, Heather, that's a pretty heavy question. Look, and I'm trying to give you a coherent answer here, I guess, but here's my feelings on it right now. I believe that for most Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, remembrance here, I think it's instinctual for so many people. That's because this place is so deeply scarred, and the course of its history was so profoundly changed by conflict, especially the First World War. And in the decades following the First World War, Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, and indeed Atlantic Canadians in general, punched above their weight when it comes to filling the ranks of the Canadian Armed Forces. And we're going to see that evidenced here today. Like the top military representative here today is a Major General Paul Peyton. He's from Happy Valley Goose Bay, Labrador. And they needed an expert to come to Newfoundland to train modern-day members of the regiment on how to do a military funeral. And they sent down a protocol expert from Ottawa. Where is he from? Heart's Content, Newfoundland. So yeah, this place is filled with veterans around me here today, veterans of all ages, and thousands of families here, including my own, still have a very deep connection to the First World War. Because we got to remember, in the First World War, we had a population of about 240,000, less than half of what it is today, and 25,000 people signed up to support the war effort in some way or another, and we lost 1,700 souls. And 800 of those, including the soldier we're going to bury here today, reinter here today, is an unknown. So we saw a lot of evidence of that over the last few days. May 25th, when the soldier returned from France, there were thousands of people lining the streets just to catch a glimpse of the casket. The lying in state ended yesterday, and they had to add 3 hours to the public viewing just to allow enough people to pay their respects to the soldier. And again here today, we're still a ways from the ceremony, and just look at the crowd. So as I said, Heather, remembrance, paying homage to our veterans and to those who served, it's part of our DNA.
It's instinctive, isn't it, Terry? Instinctive to you, and I'm looking forward to your speaking to those people who have joined the lines, who are paying respects today. Terry's going to be interviewing a number of them, and Terry mentioned a couple of other things of great interest, his family connections. We'll talk about those. Terry just happens to have a son who is one of the pallbearers as well, now as part of the reserves in the Royal Newfoundland Regiment. Those are stories we'll share with you today as well. But Terry, I'd like to talk about what we're going to see today. I mentioned this is the culmination of these days of remembrance as we were looking at the scenes and are, in fact, looking live still at what is happening in the Confederation building in the lying in state. It has all really built, it has swelled to the crescendo that is today. So what is going to happen today? Take us through the events.
Yeah, I guess the best way I can put it, Heather, is that we're going to see a somber spectacle here today. A military event, really dignified event. So, we're going to see a big marching contingent here today, one led by the Royal Canadian Legion, one led by the Canadian Armed Forces. Ordinarily, there are about 100 people on parade here. The estimate is today that we're going to have 500 military personnel, veterans, and other supporters of that effort. We're going to hear, there's a cannon on Signal Hill. There's going to be a 19-gun salute as the Canadian Armed Forces contingent marches toward the cenotaph. We're going to see some very unique events. Ordinarily, the Canadian soldiers are only permitted to salute the Canadian anthem and the Royal Anthem. Well, General Wayne Eyre, in one of his final orders, has authorized soldiers here today to salute the Ode to Newfoundland, because we've got to remember the context, the respect in the global circumstances of the day when Newfoundland was a dominion of the British Empire. We were self-governing. So we're going to see two flags presented to the next of kin here today, to the Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador. The Red Ensign, which this soldier would have fought under, and the Canadian flag. And one more thing we're going to see as the casket is lowered. You see this flower on my chest here. It's called a forget-me-not. And here in Newfoundland and Labrador, it has the same significance as the poppy, because this became our symbol of remembrance after Beaumont Hamel in 1916. So we're going to see a lot more. We're going to see, pipers. We're going to see a flypast by the Royal Canadian Air Force. So it's going to be, as I said, a somber military spectacle here today.
Happens to be the 100th anniversary of the Royal Canadian Air Force as well, Terry. Terry, you've raised so many things that we're going to talk about in much more detail. Thank you for doing so. And as Terry mentioned, as we look again at some of the last images of the casket inside the Confederation building, you can see the flags that Terry was mentioning. The Canadian flag wrapped around the casket and also the red ensign, both of which will be presented to the Premier, Andrew Furey, in his capacity as next of kin in the ceremony to come. 100 years ago, Newfoundland was war poor, the workforce devastated by the casualties of the Great War. But when a call went out to mark the sacrifices of the thousands who served, the people of the Dominion responded to help build a war memorial grand in structure and replete with symbolism. She stands atop her granite plinth, the spirit of Newfoundland, her sword at the ready to cut down her foes, her torch held high, a beacon of freedom, inspired by the imagery in John McCrae's In Flanders Fields.
She was holding that torch out. That torch was to be held out for all generations to come.
The National War Memorial in St. John's was the product of years of relentless work by Father Thomas Nangle, Padre of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment. It was dedicated 100 years ago today, on July 1st, 1924. Now, after an extensive $6 million restoration, the memorial becomes the final resting place of one of those unnamed soldiers repatriated from northern France.
The Newfoundland National Memorial has always been a sacred place in Newfoundlanders and Labradorians' eyes. But after July 1st, will even be that much more sacred.
A sacred place, the Newfoundland National War Memorial, again, as we look at the live pictures from inside the Confederation building. But of course, the National War Memorial is where this casket is bound. Oh, the removal of the unwrapping of some of the honors there as they prepare to place the casket in the hearse. And to where I'm located, just in front of the National War Memorial, where we can see the crowds filling in. And they will be here, we would expect, by the thousands, despite the fact that it's a little gray, a little damp, a little windy. Beverly Bennett, that's a typical Newfoundland day. It's rather appropriate, isn't it? Joining me all through the morning is Beverly Bennett. She's the archivist from the Rooms, which is this most extraordinary museum, archives, and art gallery in St. John's. Thank you for being here. I'm delighted to share today with you.
Thank you for having me here today.
As we look at the scene behind us, we can turn and look. Obviously, even the time that we've been getting ready, the crowd filling in all along Duckworth Street. Similar, perhaps, to what it looked like exactly 100 years ago when this was originally dedicated.
That's right. 100 years ago, the newspapers reported there were 20,000 people hanging off rooftops, lining the streets, hanging out of the windows of all the local businesses, trying to catch a glimpse of what was happening.
It was a glorious sunny day, the newspapers also said. A little bit different in that regard.
A little different today, but I think that the mood and the weather sort of match today. It's certainly a somber occasion.
They really do. I think that's absolutely right. Someone said to me earlier, it'll be hard to distinguish where the rain stops and the tears begin.
Yes, I think
We're likely
so.
to get some high emotion again as the music that you're hearing in the background, the Ennis sisters are going to be performing and with a choir, and there's going to be some very evocative music. So they're rehearsing, and it's kind of the nice underpinning to all of this because, as you say, a somber day, a powerful day, one of tremendous historic significance.
Yes.
We're going to learn a lot today about people I think perhaps aren't even well enough known in Newfoundland and Labrador, let alone the rest of the country. One is a man by the name of Thomas Nangle, the Padre for the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, the chaplain for the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, and soldier priest. He was a lieutenant colonel as well. Yes. When it came time to building that National War Memorial, they had some challenges in terms of getting the funding. So tell me about Thomas Nangle and what he did.
They certainly did. Thomas Nangle was a young man from St. John's. Many of his fellow classmates and fellow athletes had enlisted, and he very much wanted to enlist. But as a Catholic priest, he wasn't allowed. They wouldn't let him be the chaplain. They didn't want any Catholic priests from Newfoundland to go. They felt they couldn't spare any. But he was determined. So throughout the war, he was with the people. He was a very popular chaplain when he did get to join. And when he came back, he had a real dream, a real vision of what the memorial should look like. He wanted to see a memorial big enough for everybody to come in droves and walk around. He wanted to see a tomb of the unknown soldier there. he wanted to see each division of the forces recognized: the Mercantile Marine, the Royal Navy, the Foresters, and the Regiment.
And we're going to be looking close up at those scenes so we could, because the bronzes at the memorial are exactly all of those four parts. But in order to get the funding for that, and I should pause and just point out that what we're looking at here is the casket on the move being carried by the 6 pallbearers who are present-day members of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, which is now part of the reserves, and they are bearing the casket to the hearse for the procession here to the National War Memorial. And these are pallbearers who have carried this casket, who have borne this casket with pride throughout. They were in France, in Beaumont-Hamel, to receive it from France to Canada, put it on that plane, were carrying it as it landed in home in St. John's, and we'll bring it right to its final resting place at the National War Memorial. It was the dream of Thomas Nangle to bring an unknown soldier home as well. And as I say, we have lots of time today to talk about these in more detail. But when it came to the funding of that war memorial,
That's right.
war poor, as I mentioned.
Absolutely.
People didn't have money. What did he do to bring the community in?
Right. So this was never a government initiative to build the National War Memorial. The government has certainly cared for it in the years since, but to actually build it, it was a real grassroots effort. The Patriotic Association Newfoundland, the Great War Veterans Association, members of the Board of Trade, everybody came together wanting to build this monument. And they did so by selling shares in the National War Memorial Company Unlimited.
Really?
That was the largest fundraiser that they did to fund the War Memorial. So for $1 a share.
$1 a share. And you
$1 a
have
share, I
actual
do.
shares?
So
I
I
can touch
have-
this one. This is a replica,
this is
correct?
a replica.
Isn't that incredible? The Newfoundland War Memorial Company Unlimited to Mr. Eric Ellis of St. John's, and he bought 5 shares.
He did. He was a veteran himself.
And then these are the real ones?
Yes, this is one of the books that would have gone out. This actually went to a small community in Placentia Bay named called Haystack. Only 3 shares were sold in this book. So this was returned mostly unused to the committee.
And they have this in the rooms as one of the many beautiful pieces of archival material. But once this was available, I mean, there was such a desire on the part of Newfoundlanders at the time to do something to honor the war dead. Was it quite did people race to buy shares if they could?
Selling the shares was a little bit slow in the beginning. So for about a year and a half, they struggled to sell the shares. And then Thomas Nangle got involved in February 1922. And he was such a popular figure. He'd, sat with the wounded and the ill. He had written letters home to the mothers. So if he was involved, everybody wanted to be involved. And he really mobilized the people of Newfoundland together to do this. So through the selling of shares, through sporting events that he organized, dances, various other events.
They raised the money.
money.
And what was the total needed, Bev?
Just over 45,000.
45,000 to build this beautiful National War Memorial. Years before the National War Memorial in Ottawa, 100 years ago today, it was dedicated. Much more to come on that. 45,000, $6.5 million to refurbish it for today, most of which from the provincial government, but with federal government funding as well. But $45,000. Thank you for bringing those archives to us and those pieces of memorabilia. We have some more that we're going to look at in the course of our broadcast. What I want to do now is just pause for a moment. We're seeing the scene, the solemnity as the casket is placed in the hearse and the pallbearers from the Royal Newfoundland Regiment. Let's just pause and listen in to this moment. inscription engraved on hundreds of headstones in the war cemeteries dotting northern France and Belgium, marking the nameless remains of those who were buried near to where they fell. Nameless perhaps in the ground, but desperately missed and mourned by many an ocean away. Bringing one of Newfoundland's sons home was the dream of the dogged and determined regiment padre, Father Thomas Nangle, his mission taken up by others 100 years later.
To actually going in and be able to tap the coffin and say, "You're going home, son." I can't talk. It's just too emotional.
He was young, he went away, he fought for our freedoms, and he fought for us to be here today.
So why not use DNA technology to learn the identity of this soldier? Well, the point is not knowing. He will represent the hundreds of Newfoundlanders and Labradorians whose resting places may never be known.
People say, could that be my great-great-uncle? And there is that possibility, it may be. So that will give emotion and make emotions really high, I think, for that special day.
I'll feel emotional. I'm an emotional person, but I'll still be proud to know the possibility was there, that it could have been my grandfather.
You're watching live pictures outside Confederation Building, which is the House of Assembly, the provincial legislature in St. John's and Newfoundland and Labrador, of course. And the scene is the honor guard, the pallbearers, precisely, reverentially place that casket in the hearse, and it will begin its procession about a short drive down to my location here at the National War Memorial. Watching this, and she has certainly spent a lot of time at Confederation Building in the past few days and was there, in fact, right at the beginning as the body was repatriated from France. Heather Gillis, also from CBC Newfoundland and Labrador. Heather, thank you for being part of our special broadcast today. The campaign, as we're watching the culmination of all of this, the campaign to bring the unknown soldier home, it actually began many years ago, but was reinvigorated several years ago. How did it start, and who was behind it?
Well, Heather, we really owe this historic day to Frank Sullivan. Now, he is a member of the Royal Canadian Legion Newfoundland and Labrador Command, but also a veteran. He served with the Royal Canadian Navy for 42 years. And Frank Sullivan requested the repatriation of an unknown soldier to Newfoundland and Labrador. And for Sullivan, who you just saw on your screen a few moments ago, this is deeply personal. During the First World War, he has a great uncle, Private Charles Canning, who has no known grave. He was killed in France in 1918. So for all we know, the unknown soldier being laid to rest here at the National War Memorial today could be Frank Sullivan's great uncle. Frank Sullivan was in the foyer of Canada's Parliament buildings in Ottawa when a soldier from Vimy Ridge was repatriated in 2000. And it was that moment that got Sullivan thinking that Newfoundland and Labrador should have its own, because before the war and during the war, we were our own dominion of the British Empire, equivalent to Canada and the Commonwealth countries like Australia and New Zealand and South Africa that do have their own unknown soldiers. So Sullivan thought, why not Newfoundland? So he got to work in 2020 writing letters to the Minister of Veterans Affairs, and Sullivan was actually turned down at first. So the Royal Canadian Legion had another job that they wanted to do. They wanted to refurbish this war memorial here, and it has been refurbished since with a $6.5 million refurbishment over the last year or so. And they had a meeting with the Premier, Andrew Furey, to ask for money to refurbish this war memorial. And during that meeting, Frank Sullivan saw an opportunity to ask the Premier to get on side with the repatriation of an unknown soldier, and he did. And he threw his weight behind the cause too, and then some of those no's started turning into yeses. And of course, here we are today. Of course, it's an emotional day for Sullivan. Emotions are high. Every time you talk to someone about this topic, emotions just come bubbling up from deep within so many people. And as the unknown soldiers start to lay in state on Friday, we spoke to Sullivan, and here's what he had to say.
I wrote the letter requesting this back in 2020, and with support of the Royal Canadian Legion, both Dominion and Provincial Command, and finally with support of the Government of Newfoundland, Premier Fiore and the Government of Newfoundland, it was approved in 2022.
How big a deal is it that Newfoundland and Labrador has its own unknown soldier, considering that there is already one in Ottawa?
Well, doing research on this, we were in our own Dominion back in the First and Second World War. And when they decided to take the Canadian soldier from Vimy Ridge, he couldn't have been a Newfoundlander. And Dr. Serge Bernier, part of the group, suggested that, told him that. He said, if we bring him from Vimy Ridge, he cannot be a Newfoundlander. And they went ahead and took him anyway. So to me, he doesn't represent the people of Newfoundland and Labrador. So this is why I started this. And Padre Nangle had requested one back in 1919, and we can't find any follow-up paperwork anywhere. So it was just dropped, I guess. So that was his dream, to complete the National War Memorial. On Monday, we'll complete his dream.
How are you feeling?
As I was just saying inside, I can't describe the emotions. He left some little house somewhere in Newfoundland, and now he's going to the people's house in Newfoundland. So what more can one ask for?
And there you have it from Frank Sullivan. From the People's House, he is now traveling from the provincial legislature to the National War Memorial, where shortly he will be laid to rest. Heather?
Heather, thank you so very much. We'll see Frank Sullivan in prominent roles throughout the ceremony today. We'll talk more about Frank Sullivan and Gary Brown and the impact they had on Premier Fiore in terms of getting him to wholly support this project to refurbish the War Memorial and to bring the unknown soldier home. And as we have cameras here throughout St. John's, on the streets of St. John's, is the casket now in the hearse and in the procession that is bringing it to our location in the National War Memorial. As we've been mentioning some of the numbers, there were about 12,000 Newfoundlanders and Labradorians who served in some capacity during the First World War. This unknown soldier was one of 6,200, part of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, which was a regiment that suffered monumental losses, especially in the Battle of Beaumont Hamel 108 years ago today. But it also earned an international reputation for valor.
The Royal Newfoundland Regiment is Newfoundland's regiment. It belongs to the province. It belongs to the people in every way.
When the call went out to serve king and country in the Great War, Newfoundlanders and Labradorians answered eagerly. Training was intense but lighthearted. Surely victory over Germany would come swiftly. No one could have imagined the horrors ahead. The regiment first saw battle in the huge Allied defeat at Gallipoli, then moved on to France and Beaumont Hamel. On July 1st, 1916, the regiment was annihilated in a matter of minutes, stalled in the sights of the German gunners, stuck in the barbed wire between the lines, or exposed at the danger tree. But there were many victories too, and a reputation for hardened courage that earned a royal designation from King George V, the only regiment so honored during the war. In the end, 1,305 were killed. Thousands more were wounded or changed forever by what was then known as shell shock. The regiment's symbol, giant bronze caribous, now stand guard over the hallowed battlefields of Turkey, France, and Belgium, a memorial to the horrible cost and a testament to a nation's pride.
We're 229 years of service, of proud service. I don't think that changes from World War I to the present day.
Pride is a word you hear often, and we will hear often, from the growing crowd, those assembled around the Newfoundland National War Memorial with the ceremony set to begin in short order. And there's the view out. The view that the soldiers would have had as they sailed on the steamship, the SS Florizel, in October of 1914 overseas. And we'll talk about the history that followed that, looking at some of our live pictures, those who are awaiting the casket's arrival at the War Memorial. And with me now is Rick Hillier, retired general of the Canadian Forces, the former chief of defense staff in this country from 2005 to 2008, and maybe most importantly today, proud Newfoundlander. So thanks so much, sir, for giving me some time. I appreciate seeing you.
Heather, pleasure to be here.
I was
privileged to be here.
It is a privilege, isn't it? That's what I've been saying. What an honor to be covering this today. And we just had a vignette introducing people to the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, particularly the sacrifices of Beaumont Hamel. When you were growing up in Campbellton, what did you learn about Beaumont Hamel? What did people talk about?
Well, it was brought to the individual level. Every day, I think, in my life as a child, I heard from my dad about is Uncle John Clark, my great Uncle John Clark, who was killed at Passchendaele in 1917 at the age of 20. I finally got to visit his grave about 7 or 8 years ago with my wife and sisters, and I heard about him every day, and through him, what had happened to the regiment, and put a face, if you will, to some of the veterans who were still living in Campbellton, and those who I didn't realize at the time had gone through such sort of a trial by fire and survived it and had come back, and we didn't hear it from them.
They didn't tell the stories.
Never,
No.
in fact, and nobody sort of made any big deal about the fact that they were veterans and they had survived Beaumont Hamel or Monchy-le-Preux or Courtrai or any of the other fights until after they died, sadly. And then we started to hear more about it. But I heard it every day, all based on Uncle John Clark.
And so was it inevitable, given what you heard and your surroundings, that a military career was what you would pursue?
From the age of 8, it was
Is that right?
inevitable. Absolutely correct. All I ever wanted to be was a soldier. I feel privileged that I lived a life as a soldier.
But
even though I'm an old guy now, I still think I'm a soldier, right?
Yeah, you are a soldier, but was it to carry on that proud Newfoundland military tradition?
Perhaps. I'm not sure I thought
sure.
that deeply about it, but I was
now?
enthralled by the idea of being a soldier. And certainly what I had heard growing up helped me sort of come to that realization.
I've been mentioning that really the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, particularly Beaumont Hamel, isn't a part of history that those outside of Newfoundland and Labrador know well enough. What do you want us to know about those soldiers and that battle?
It's something that is up close and personal. If you go to Beaumont Hamel and you go to Vimy Ridge is a massive battle that Canadians fought, 100,000 Canadians and 200,000 more on the British forces side engaged against almost as many Germans. And right down the road is Beaumont Hamel, just a small, quiet little battlefield where the sons of Newfoundland and Labrador, fathers and sons and brothers and family members would all join together, all died in a few moments of each other on that terrible day on the 1st of July, 1916. And it's such a small, intimate, personal battlefield. You can throw a rock the distance that they managed to advance, and you can throw a rock from the front lines to the danger tree where so many sort of came together and tried to call back up. Can you just give a little bit more of that
detail? Just after 9 o'clock, they got the call to go over the top, and about 800 did.
They did, and so they got the call to go over. By now, the initial fight had already long started. The crater had been blown. The Germans were fully alert and on the defensive, and you could hear nothing but the machine guns and artillery pieces going. The idea was to go down and use the communication trenches, which connected the front trenches with where the Newfoundlanders were. But by now, those communications trenches are so filled with the wounded and the dead from the first attack that they have to get up and walk on sort of the ball ground. There were no trees, no cover, because the battlefield had been fought over so much that was all gone. And they moved forward. The barbed wire, the entanglements of barbed wire were, literally hundreds of feet deep, with only about 2 lanes going through. The German machine gunners and snipers and artillery observers had zeroed in on those lanes with the first attack. And now when the Newfoundlanders came through, they just concentrated their fire. And that's where many of the Newfoundlanders first died. Very few got as far as the German front lines. A lot more got wounded between that barbed wire or killed between that barbed wire and the front lines. The wounded tried then to either get to a place they recognized, hence the danger tree, which was one of the few places few things that you could see and recognize, and then meet with others. Even if they were wounded, there was comfort and being amongst their battle buddies, if you will, and try to get back to the trenches.
And it was all over in minutes. Annihilation, and the numbers that are cited, everyone knows them here, 800 over the top and 68 survived to answer roll call the next morning. So it had a profound effect. And you wrote a piece in the National Post, which was really very powerful, about how, to the effect that nothing in the province, well, which was then the Dominion, of course, of Newfoundland, nothing would ever be the same. What changed as a result?
Well, in that first 500 that joined and founded the bulk of the regiment on that morning, there were more obviously who joined later, were all the next generation's leaders. They were all the sons of the businessmen and the government officials, largely from here in St. John's, but not just. And they logically would have taken over as the leaders in the 1920s, 1930s, and 1940s. And then in 45 minutes, they were gone. And for the next decades, until in fact we were into confederation with Canada, and as we like to say, until we lured Canada to join us in confederation.
Someone told me that just the other day, until Canada joined Newfoundland in 1949. I thought that was brilliant. So everything changed as a result of that. The events that followed led to that happening in 1949. I've been thinking about those numbers again. So 6,000 in the Royal Newfoundland Regiment and about 1,300 killed, and of those, 600 with no known graves, not found or identified. That's a huge percentage. When you sign up to be a soldier, I was thinking about this, maybe I'm off base, but you know what the risks you're assuming, prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice. But is the notion that you would never be found, never come home, never be identified, would that be particularly difficult? Would that be abhorrent to a soldier?
Obviously back then, it certainly could have been, but you know, these are young men, and young men are immortal. Right? They don't expect that. If there are 10 people in a section and 9 are going to die, they're told, they don't think that they're going to be one of those 9. They think that they're going to be the survivor. So those thoughts don't necessarily run through your mind. One of the things that does, though, keep the morale up is when you actually take care of those that you lose. Right. And we've proven that in war after war, not just from Newfoundland, but when our padres do their business and look after the bodies of those that have died and make sure they're treated appropriately with great dignity and recovered. That does give people confidence that they're going to be looked after even in death, World War I was renowned for the number of bodies that were lost, never recovered, never identified, never known where they were buried. And obviously to this day, we continue to recover bodies, we continue to identify them, and we continue to bury them. And you know, we're burying today not a corpse from 108 years or 106 years ago, we're burying a young son of Newfoundland and Labrador today.
And what does it mean to you?
It's absolutely surreal to be here and just think of the distance we have traveled as a province and as soldiers and as Newfoundlanders and Labradorians in that period of 108 years or 106 years or so, and the sacrifice that they made, how they flowed from the outports into St. John's, across the ocean. None of them had ever been there before, and some of them lasted only minutes in those trenches. And so few came back, and so many of those few who came back changed for life, sometimes physically, often physically, but almost always mentally. And they toughed it out, and they got on with living their life and raising families and making a living because that's what they had to do. I think it just undermines the strength and courage of our great province and the people who built it and continue to do so to this day. And I think none better epitomized than by our awesome premier, who is identified as the next of kin here. And I've spent some time with him over the last several months, and I've just become so impressed with this really good man who is the premier of our province. I'm proud that he's representing Newfoundland and Labrador as next of kin.
He has found it a very moving experience, as we're about to share with our viewers, because he stopped by as well to talk. I really appreciate all of your thoughts. I appreciated your column, and I'll let you go because I want to make sure you have a good place to view something very significant.
Thank you.
General Recillier joining us here as we broadcast the return home, the unknown soldier. In terms of dignitaries, Princess Anne is the Colonel-in-Chief of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, but of course we know she had an unfortunate mishap with her horse and was in hospital being treated for concussion. She's since been discharged, unable to travel, though, to be in St. John's today. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is there, as you see live, and he will be both presenting a wreath and speaking in the course of events today. The Governor General, Mary Simon, is here, the Lieutenant Governor of Newfoundland and Labrador, the Premier, as we've mentioned, number of other dignitaries representing the Legion and veterans and various military officers as well, and we'll tell you about that as
Right Honorable Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada.
Pausing for his introduction. And applause for the Prime Minister that he should come to St. John's for this historic moment. So he will take his place, and again, we'll keep our eye on the live pictures, but we mentioned again with General Hillier, and I mentioned with Heather Gillis, the Premier of Newfoundland and Labrador is Andrew Furey, and he has been heavily involved in the lead up to today. Heather was mentioning Frank Sullivan and Gary Brown and the meeting that they had with the Premier. I was speaking to him about that as well when he visited earlier this morning. Premier Furey, thanks for giving me some time today. Heather Gillis was just talking about Frank Sullivan and Gary Brown, and when they came to you, they are, aren't they? And when they came to you and they made their pitch for the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier, they said you were all in, right from the start. You never hesitated. Why was that?
Well, they came into the office. The story is they came into the office and we were talking about the refurbishment of the War Memorial. After 100 years, it needed some TLC. And I said, no, sure, whatever you need, we'll do that. And then Frank, I think, or Gary sat up and he said, I have this binder, Premier. And it was about this thick. And he
For
said,
the Unknown Soldier?
He said, there's something else you need to know. I said, what? He said, well, you know, the Unknown Soldier in Canada doesn't represent Newfoundland and Labrador. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you know, the soldier came from Vimy. We didn't, it doesn't represent the soldiers of the First World War for Newfoundland when we were our own dominion, equivalent of Canada, the Dominion of Canada, the Dominion of Newfoundland. We deserve our own. I said, you're right, we do. I said, how do we make that happen? He said, well, we've been turned down before, but here's a whole binder. I said, no, you don't have to open the binder. You don't even have to get to page one. I'm all in. How can we make this happen? And before they left the office, we had a letter drafted, and I was on the phone with Lawrence Macaulay and convinced him to do it.
Isn't that fantastic?
Yeah.
So some personal satisfaction, I'm sure, with what's about to unfold.
In this job, you sometimes don't get to see plans to fruition. Sometimes you inherit other plans. Sometimes your plans won't come to fruition for years. This was something that we set out, had been told, by the way, many times no before by the War Graves Commission and by Veterans Affairs Canada. But this time we dug in and made sure the answer was yes, because it's the right thing to do.
As you said, in this job, of course, Premier, but your job today, you have an additional designation as next of kin. What is that role, and why will it lead to, I mean, you're going to have a very prominent role through the ceremony today.
It's, well, absent the family, because we don't know who the family is, someone has to serve as the next of kin. That person is me, as Premier of the province. I can tell you, Heather, it's been an incredibly emotional role to occupy. The weight of it is overwhelming at times. The responsibility I'm humbled to shoulder, but I was not expecting this when Frank and Gary came in the office that day. I wasn't expecting the emotion of next of kin, something that I've really tried to understand and digest.
You certainly saw that. You were very moved in France,
yes,
and very moved when the casket returned home. Where is it coming from, do you think, that emotion? Why has this been so moving for you?
Well, I think, you know, everyone in Newfoundland and Labrador has been touched in some way by service, and you know the numbers. You know, I'm sure you've said the statistics today. This is somebody's son. We don't know whose son it is, but it's all of our son, and someone needs to be the father to that lost soul, and that's me right now. And standing in France with my son, we're walking up the steps of Confederation the other day with my family. I really felt the weight of that, representing every family member, every mother or father who waited back in 1917 for word, hoping it was the best word, but realizing it may not be.
You actually wrote a letter.
I did.
As if you were writing to a mother of that time. It was a very powerful letter, and I'm wondering, and we're going to share some of it on our screen so people can read some of your words. I mean, I could share it all. Very moving. What was the experience? Why did you write it? What was the experience of actually composing that?
So when we came home to St. John's, the whole day was very moving in France and overwhelming at times, and it broke me several times. But I think I was prepared for that being emotional. What I was not prepared for was the motorcade when we came home to St. John's. I mean, we had a month of fog, and all of a sudden the weather lifted, and there was a sunny moment, and there was thousands of people who lined up in solemn respect for this, our son, and I was incredibly moved by that gesture. That our people showed up for him. He showed up for us, and they showed up for him. And the muse hit me as I was going to bed that night. I said to my wife, I said, I'm going to have to write something. I've written things, you know, in the past, not much as Premier other than speeches, but got up the next morning, wrote a letter in my head, and then penned it immediately.
As if it was going to be received and going to be...
Because it feels like there needs to be some closure, you know. Yeah, we brought somebody home, but it feels like there still needs to be a delivery of message to the family of those who lost their son.
The valor and the grit and the determination.
And the fighting Newfoundlander and Labrador, and something we can be proud of, something we should respect, but something we can be proud of. Be proud of his service, be proud of his valor, be proud of his courage, for all the freedoms and democracy and liberty that we enjoy today.
If it has been emotional in the earlier stages of this ceremonial, what do you think today is going to be like for you?
Yeah, well, the chief warrant officer who's in charge of the whole thing has warned me. He said, "Sir, you're going to get a kick in the gut." And so I'm expecting that, but we'll try to.
I don't know, when Ode to Newfoundland is sung and performed, that's going to be an emotional high point, I think.
It is indeed. I mean, it's a beautiful, beautiful ode, but there's a couple of lyrics in there, especially where once they stood, we now stand. And the significance of those lyrics in particular, and to hear them being sung loudly and proudly today by Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, and I hope all Canadians, will be a special moment.
You concluded your letter with, "Your boy is now home." Today you'll be able to say that.
Indeed. Today we'll be able to say to all the families, your son is home.
Thank you, Premier Fuhr. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
That is Premier Andrew Furey. As we spoke earlier, as I mentioned, next of kin, and we will be seeing him in great detail. Today, we're looking at the arrival of Newfoundland and Labrador's Lieutenant Governor, Joan Marie Alward, taking her place among the dignitaries. You see the Prime Minister there as well. Terry Roberts is with us this morning, and Terry is with a special guest, someone who has played a very important role, both in how the War Memorial looks and in the tomb itself of the unknown soldier. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Terry, to you.
All right. Well, I'd like to introduce you to Morgan MacDonald, a well-known Newfoundland and Labrador sculptor. Now, Morgan, you had a very important job to do here today. These sculptures look the same as they did right now 100 years ago when General Douglas Haig unveiled these sculptures. What have you done here?
Well, there was an extensive refurbishment of the statues. We've been spending some time down on site here trying to replicate the patina, bring them back to their former glory. So this is basically an artistic endeavor. You know, in the foundry, usually the artist, when they create a statue, they will, the last step is to do the patina, which is the coloring of the piece. And this is a very specialized kind of skill that artists acquire over years. So I was very honored to be tasked with the project to recreate the patina that would have been there 100 years ago when these were first installed here in St. John's.
Well, how did you feel? You're reconnecting with some artisans from a century ago. What did you notice about their work and any lessons you might have learned?
Well, it's from an era gone by. These were world famous artists in their day. They were well respected, and they were hired by Padre Thomas Nangle, who was the progenitor of the monument. And so, you know, being up close and personal with these statues in a way that other people, you know, from the ground level, don't get a chance to see these. It was quite a moving experience to just see the hand marks from the sculptors that, you know, they would have made in the studio so long ago in London, and the care and the you know, the dedication that they had creating these pieces so long ago.
All right, and you will play a role in this new edition we have here today at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. Well, tell me what role you've played here.
Oh, absolutely. This is I'm over the moon at this. I'm incredibly honored. I was tasked to create the bouquet that was. We've been working on this for a few months at the foundry. That is going to be on the lid of the sarcophagus. So this is quite a special moment for me to be able to create such a work of art, and it's the newest piece of bronze on the monument in 100 years. So this is
all right, Morgan. Thank you very much, Heather. Back to you. That's Morgan MacDonald, a sculptor here in St. John's.
Terry, thank you so very much, and Morgan as well. We will look forward to that when it is a little bit more visible later in the ceremony. One of the bronze caribou monuments, we've been talking about the Trail of the Caribou today, honoring the significant battlefields for the Royal Newfoundland Regiment. It is in Masneer, and there's a plaque there that commemorates Lance Corporal John Shywock. His great-nephew is with me today, Daniel Pottle. I'm delighted to enjoy some time with you. Thank you for coming by. The Governor General is arriving. We hear some noise in the background as she arrives. This is her first official visit to Newfoundland and Labrador. She's going to be spending some time in Labrador, as a matter of fact, but that's what's happening in the background to our conversation. Your great-uncle, John Shywock, I'd like to learn about him, what he did in the First World War. He was a famous sniper. Tell us about him.
I guess back up a little bit. My uncle John Shywock was Labrador Inuk, born in his little homestead outside of Riglet called Cul-de-sac in 1889 in March, February or March, we're not quite sure which month. Uncle John's formative years, of course, were spent learning to live, hunt, fish off the land, help provide for the family. At a young age, he left home and did some odd jobs, I think, for the Hudson Bay Company, the Grenfell Mission, Dr. Padden, I think you may have known that name. Uncle John, I think, was a very ambitious and a very adventurous individual. He expressed from an early age, I think, especially when he met writer William Lacey Amy, he expressed his desire to become a soldier. It's the way he coined it. He was a member of the Legion of Canadian Frontiersmen. I think that was an early influence in his thinking about wanting to serve.
Where do you think that come from? Because when we think Inuit, we think non-confrontational, don't we? And yet he wanted to enlist. It was important.
He wanted to enlist. I think his desire probably was colored by the missionaries at the time, Dr. Padden, other influential people with the Canadian Legion Frontiersmen. He, I think, wanted an opportunity to see the world, some adventure. I don't think he really knew what he was getting into until, of course, he was in the trenches.
Isn't that true? That was such a common experience, the adventure, big world, and then the reality of the horrors of that war. But he was known as one of the best in the British Army. That's how he was described, as a sniper.
Yes, he was touted to be the best sniper in the British Army at the time. His skills were honed from how he termed swatching seals. Momentary, when the seal raised its head through the water, you had no other choice but be on point. Ammunition was very scarce, so that honed his skills and prepared him well for his role as a sniper.
That would be an uncommon training, wouldn't it, for most of those in the war?
Exactly.
He had many successful days and missions and battles, but eventually fell in 1917 in the Battle of Cambrai. What were the circumstances of that, Daniel?
From what I understand, he was second wave of the cleanup after the Battle of Cambrai. They were crossing a bridge near the sugar factory, near the town of Masneer. So the story goes, a German shell exploded, an errant German shell exploded, and him and six of his comrades fell. That's where they laid that day, and his remains, until a few years ago, were unknown to us where his final resting place were, until some work was done by local historian here, Frank Gogos, and cartographer David Mercy at Memorial University, who took the coordinates from the battle that day and were able to pinpoint exactly where they fell. So he's now under 6 meters of rubble. There's no way we'll ever...
Really? But he went from being one of those 800 names we see on the wall of those who were unknown. At least you know where he is. Now, it's not a very satisfactory final resting place, I'm sure, but to know that, is that important to you and the family?
No, that's very, very powerful to know that so many others do not have the same honor that we have now, to know where his final remains are and where his resting place is. It's so significant.
You can go there and you could pay
I can go there. I hope to get there one day, and I will. You know.
So is the emotion from thinking about him or just knowing that you know where he is?
I've always held my Uncle John and other Indigenous veterans in very high regard. I think they were the unsung heroes of the war, the great wars, peacekeeping efforts. They were Indigenous. They were recognized as citizens of our country. They never received the same benefits when they came home. They were shunned, and they were left to their own devices. They were a part of liberating, that my Uncle John is revered in France for his role of coming to liberate France and the rest of Europe during World War I. I wish that he was held in that same regard here in this country, and that's what I'm working towards.
I was going to say, you're not just, those aren't just words, you're actually making this advocacy, and you're hoping to have more attention paid to the service and sacrifice of Indigenous veterans. What would you like to see? I know you have a plan for what is up near that National War Memorial. You'd like to have something for the Indigenous veterans too, wouldn't you?
Yes, I would like to see, given that the province of Newfoundland and Labrador has expropriated the land adjacent to the War Memorial with a plan to expand that, I think it's time for the province and Canada to work together with another Indigenous organization to ensure that Indigenous veterans are honored, recognized, commemorated, and they take their rightful place in the history of this province and in this country. Therefore, I would like to see some sort of monument or a memorial, hopefully in the likeness of my Uncle John Chaiwak, to represent all Indigenous veterans. He's renowned, he's one of the most well-known, and I just read this morning, given his military record, he was one of the most significant soldiers in the Royal Newfoundland Regiment. That speaks miles.
It really
he should
does.
be commemorated.
I'm so grateful that you're telling us about us to help us learn more. There's a lot available for people to learn about him online and pictures, and they can put a face to this incredible history. What I'm wondering is, as I see the emotion of knowing where your uncle is, your great uncle is, how do you think we should view today? Because again, in that casket is an unknown soldier who is about to be home at last for good. It's a very profound moment. How do you feel it for?
It's very powerful. Mixed emotions. It's hard to describe really how you feel because you're just all over the place. Right? But it is, I think, timely. It's time that our veterans were recognized and honored in this way, given the sentiments held by the province here that Newfoundland was a country before Confederation. Our veterans, Indigenous veterans, were British citizens.
Yes.
And they deserve the same recognition.
Daniel, thank you. What a pleasure to meet you, to learn about John Chaiwak and his incredible heroics in the First World War. And thank you very much. I'm just going to leave this conversation. I'm going to bring in Heather Gillison. She is talking to some people. Heather, as you join me, you listen to Daniel and you get the sense of the emotion here. It is profound. It is running through everyone. Someone said to me, in going on the air, we're going to have to say this is a broadcast sponsored by Kleenex. It is indeed high emotion here. And tell me about where you are and to whom you are speaking.
Well, Heather, I'm here with Kim and Dave Padden, and it's really not hard to find anyone in this crowd with a connection to the First World War. So, Kim, what can you tell me about your family's connection to the Great War?
My paternal grandmother's brother, my great uncle, I guess, Lance Corporal Horatio Barber from Port Rexton. He was one of the many that didn't come home. We've got a portrait of him in my hallway that I see almost every day. I had a little chat with him today on the way out.
What did you say to him, Kim?
Well, I said, well, at least another one's coming home. And you know, I find myself talking to him a lot lately, you know, considering what's happening in the world, you know, because it's kind of sad to think that things haven't changed a whole lot. Yeah.
What does today mean to you and your family to see an unknown soldier from this province repatriated?
I don't think anybody, well, I'm speaking for everybody, but speaking for myself, I don't think I was prepared for how overwhelming it would be. Like, even when they did the initial arrival a couple of weeks ago, like standing down there, as we were talking about, suddenly it overtakes you, like the significance of it, and it's hard to put into words.
Absolutely, and everyone has a moment where those emotions bubbled to the surface.
Yeah.
What made you want to come out today?
We come every year, but I think today, you know, I don't know, it just felt like we needed to be here.
What do you think of the crowds braving this wet weather to see the unknown soldier be laid to rest here?
I always think that it's not very much compared to what they went through, a little bit of rain.
Well, Kim, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
Heather, back to you.
Heather, thank you so very much, and what a pleasure to speak to some of the people who have gathered. It looks like there are indeed, as expected, thousands despite the rain and the wind and the gray. Let's just pause for a moment as the procession gets ever closer to the National War Memorial.
Youth, veterans, and our special guests to the Newfoundland Labrador Unknown Soldier Interment Ceremony. My name is Perry Grandy, and on behalf of the Royal Canadian Legion, Newfoundland and Labrador Command, welcome. I sincerely welcome friend and colleague Arlene King as co-master of ceremonies for today's historic commemoration.
Anciens combattants, distingués invités, mesdames et messieurs, bienvenue à la cérémonie d'inhumation du soldat inconnu terre-neuvien de la Première Guerre mondiale. Je m'appelle Arlene King et au nom du gouvernement de Terre-Neuve et Labrador, j'aimerais vous remercier pour votre présence ici aujourd'hui. Mon collègue, M. Perry Grandy de la Légion royale canadienne, direction de Terre-Neuve et Labrador, et moi-même serons vos maîtres de cérémonie pour cette commémoration historique.
Our special guests today include Her Excellency, the Right Honourable Mary Simon, CC, CMM, COM, QC, CD, the Governor-General and Commander-in-Chief of Canada. Her Honour, the Honourable Joan Marie Aylward.
So you're looking and listening there to the fourth
CCNL,
of what will be a 19-gun salute from the guns atop Signal Hill of the Queen's Battery there. The 19-round salute, why was that? Well, we asked the Canadian Armed Forces why that number for the unknown soldier as we watch the hearse make its way through the streets of St. John's. 19 because that's the highest number of rounds that can be fired in salute of a military member at a military funeral. And of course, we don't know the rank of the unknown Newfoundland First World War soldier, so the soldier is receiving the highest honor possible in this context. 19, one every minute for this stage of the procession. And you're listening behind to the MCs for the ceremony as they greet the dignitaries, all of whom are in position now. And in position with me now, in our location, is actor, writer, most importantly today, Newfoundlander, Mark Critch. And I couldn't be happier that you've given me some time. I'm so glad to see you. Thank you.
Oh, I'm delighted that you're here, and I wouldn't be anywhere else in the world.
What do you make of the scene?
It's exactly what I expected it to be, you know, regardless of the weather, regardless of it being Canada Day. Newfoundlanders and Labradorians always take the time to mark this day, and Newfoundlanders and Labradorians especially know the pain and the lack of closure of not having a body. You know, we've grown up next to the sea. There have been countless lost souls and countless mothers looking out to the ocean, wondering where their child is. So today we're able to give some closure to that feeling for the thousands of Newfoundlanders and Labradorians related to someone who didn't come back.
You know, your reputation as the people in the province, you know, outgoing and easygoing and fun and humorous, but there is a reverence and there is an extreme solemnity. At times like this, I'm always struck at Memorial Day, having been to a number of them, how many people come year after year after year. So you're right, I'm not surprised at all, given the numbers. The thing that is also striking is that so many of the people here feel a direct connection to the events of more than 100 years ago.
Yeah, well, it shaped who we are, you know. As you'll hear time and time again, a generation of our best and brightest, future leaders gone. The paying back the war debt actually very much led to our joining Canada. In many ways, it's also a memorial to the Dominion of Newfoundland, which fell apart after our war loss. But a lot of people I speak to will talk about that relative who did come home and how they'd look out the window and maybe they drank too much and they never talked about it. And I think that pain and seeing that trauma affected a lot of these people here. Know somebody. I had World War I veterans come to my school and speak to me when I was a kid.
Really?
I shook their hands. I remember talking to them about their experiences. That's living knowledge, just living memory. And, you know, and I think we talk a lot about it, but I think what we feel is the silence of it. Tommy Ricketts, who enlisted when he was 15, he was the youngest person ever to...
17.
Yeah, he was 17.
He won the
Victoria Cross. He never wanted to talk about the war again. He became a pharmacist. When Princess Elizabeth came here in the 50s, they had a big celebration here, a memorial. And Princess Elizabeth said, "Where is the gentleman who received the Victoria Cross?" And they were told he didn't like to go to these things because he didn't want the focus to be on him. He came back. He lived. He wanted to be on the others. So she drove down to his pharmacy and said, "I just wanted to shake your hand."
Really?
Yeah, but he never wanted to talk about it.
I would like to ask about home.
Yeah.
I have been struck when, if you ask somebody what is most meaningful for them, they tear up and say, he's going to be home. And I was at the Confederation building where there's a wonderful display of school children's, their wishes for the unknown soldier, and it all has to do with coming home. I'd like to come home to have dinner with my family. I'd like to be home and be happy and have my happy life. It all involves home. Can you just help us understand how important home is to a Newfoundlander, the connection to this place?
It's everything. They say you always know the Newfoundlanders in heaven because they're the only ones who want to go home. And that is the truth, And
even in paradise, you want to go home to Newfoundland.
Even in paradise. And I've been to all of the different Caribou Memorial in France, and I've been to the spot where the new one is in Turkey. And those are pieces of Newfoundland in other countries. That is a piece of Newfoundland. So in many ways, they are home in a way. But for every Newfoundlander, no matter where they are, it's all they talk about, there's the music, it's the food, it's who they are. So for any Newfoundlander to come home, it means everything. You spend your whole life, you're going away, you never go away, you're just waiting to come home.
There's even come home years, isn't it, to bring people home, to come home.
Every Newfoundlander, I've met Newfoundlanders living away in Alberta, lived there 50 years. And they say, "Oh yeah, I'm only here for a while." We're salmon always coming back upstream, and this young man who we're laying to rest, I'm sure his last thoughts were of home.
Pause on that for just a second. We're going to take a little bit of a look at the pictures that are coming in, as we see so many of those from the Legion and the Armed Forces, Mark, and we'll just listen in live for just a moment and carry on with our conversation with Mark Critch momentarily.
Many who served would not return and lie buried with their comrades on the former battlefields. The unknown soldier, the unknown Newfoundland soldier who we inter today, represents the collective contribution and sacrifice of Newfoundlanders and Labradorians who served, fought, and died in all branches of the military and respective support services, especially those who have no known grave.
Beaucoup de ceux qui ont servi ne reviendront pas et restent enterrés avec leurs camarades dans les anciens champs de bataille. Le soldat inconnu que nous réunissons aujourd'hui représente la contribution collective et le sacrifice de tous ceux qui ont servi, combattu et sont morts dans toutes les branches de l'armée et des services de soutien respectifs, en particulier ceux qui n'ont pas de sépulture connue.
As the Canadian Armed Forces funeral procession marches towards the memorial, the guns will fire every minute from the Queen's Battery located in Signal Hill National Historic Site. The procession is scheduled to arrive at the memorial at 10:20 a.m. Given the solemnity of this event, we ask that you turn off your cell phones as a sign of respect. Thank you.
Alors que le cortège funèbre des forces armées canadiennes se dirige vers le mémorial, les canons tireront toutes les minutes depuis la batterie de la
As we watch the procession and that precision making its way toward the National War Memorial, and there you see the hearse as well. We've just had the 11th of the 19-gun salute. Mark Critch is with me. And Mark, I was mentioning the school children with their thoughts on what the dreams of the unknown soldier would be. And as I said, they all involve coming home. But then they were asked to draw pictures of what they thought the unknown soldier looked like. I could ask you that, but you probably have a mental image of somebody from the Royal Newfoundland Regiment who could have been very well, but because although he has, of course, his grave, but Mark's family connection is deep and one that you know well.
Mike, a connection, yeah, well, I didn't think that there was a connection at all. And then myself and my friend Alan Hawco, who we've been friends for 30 years, we were part of a documentary here by Rod Etheridge and great Ted Dillon and various other people at CBC who put together this Trail of the Caribou documentary where we visit all the battlefields and all the different caribou. And Alan had a great uncle, Walter Green. They were trying to find some connection between the Critches and the regiment. I thought, you'll never find it. We were the cowardly Critches. We didn't sign up for anything. But sure enough, there was on my grandmother's side, Tobin, J.J. Tobin. So we knew that there was a connection for me to follow.
Somewhere.
When we got over there, the people at the rooms had discovered that Hawko's relative and my relative enlisted together. They went on the same ship overseas together. They fought side by side. Hawko's relative was shot, mine had dysentery. They were taken out, they got better, they went back in, and they died standing next to each other within an hour of each other. Father Thomas Nangle, who worked to create this wonderful memorial on all of them, he saw them fall. He knew where they were. When he went back to exhume the graves, he buried them side by side because they were friends. We didn't know this.
Until you were filming the documentary.
We're walking up and we see, and so that's just one example of how this war touched every life in Newfoundland and Labrador, whether you know it or not, because people didn't talk about it, you know? And so, and then I got to know, I researched him, and this is his memorial cross. So most regiment, this is a Canadian medal for those who gave their life. He actually married by proxy a girl in Montreal during the war.
Really?
Newfoundlanders, right? So you got to get what's important done, right? So this went to her, and so that's finally have a physical connection to JJ.
Alan Hawko was on Morning Live with me last week, and he also shared that story. It affected him deeply too. You're a great friend, and you find that your relatives are buried side by side for eternity. I mean, that was really important for him. When you were doing that documentary, as you were looking out at those, they're still pristine, those battlefields, Beaumont Hamel and the other First World War battlefields. What effect did it have on you to look at that?
When you look at it, and our friend Alan Doyle was with us too, and I remember Alan saying, it's just a field. And you think of that, you know, and you think of young boys playing games of war in fields, and then going over there and, you know, seeing what they saw. I can't imagine, but the peacefulness of it, the beauty of it, and even those fields of France, how much it reminded me of fields back home, where these kids would have run and played games, and now they're kids over there, in the case of Beaumont Hamel, not only passing away, but seeing their own death in front of them as they kept going forward. Once again, I had thoughts of home.
Once again, comes back to home. Just want to acknowledge, as we look at the procession, we've been seeing the Premier, Andrew Furey, and his family. He was in Beaumont Hamel. He was very moved by the experience of the memorial there. He was standing with his son, bringing home a son of Newfoundland, and it's had quite a profound effect on him. Now is next of kin for the service today.
Well, you look at Premier's son, Mark, and I believe he's 13. And we talked about Tommy Ricketts signing up at the age of 15 and having his commendation at 17. It's not that much of a difference.
No.
So when you asked me earlier, like what you picture when you think of the young soldier who has returned home now, I picture someone probably not that much older than Premier's son.
He's probably picturing that as well. We know how many hundreds of boy soldiers there were.
Oh, lots of boys, so lots. And the big thing about lying about your age to go in, and you're going to be home by Christmas, and then here we are all these years later still feeling their pain, and also feeling their loss and what those people would have contributed to this place. You know, that's being felt today as well. And again, the pain of those who came home as well.
The song that we're hearing behind us as they perform, Let There Be Peace on Earth.
Yeah.
On a day we focus on an unknown soldier who sacrificed and fell, and of course aware of the world at war right now with Russia and Ukraine, and of course in the Middle East. It's a very poignant undercurrent, isn't it, for everything we're talking about today.
I remember a veteran of the Great War coming to speak to us, I believe in grade 1. And you know, you do those things around Remembrance Day, and you're drawing your puppies and all that stuff. And his message was, never again. I've been there. You don't understand. You know, in a way you talk to kids. And please think about this. Think about this seriously. Take a moment and think about the weight of war. And that's something that really stayed with me.
When you put on the Forget-Me-Not, we've talked a little bit about that. Long before there was the poppy, there was the Forget-Me-Not. As of July 1st, 1917, Newfoundlanders and Labradorians began to wear the forget-me-not for the fallen of Beaumont Hamel. And every July 1st, that's what you put on. What do you think? What goes through your mind? What's the emotion as you pin on a forget-me-not?
Well, it's a very special thing, and I'll often see forget-me-nots just in the wild here. Once again, it's home, you know. And
which incidentally is why it was chosen.
Which is why it
for
was chosen,
the soldiers, because it is hardy, because it grows here on Newfoundland,
and it's always here.
Yes,
it's beautiful, but it's like a weed. You can't stop it, you know. And that is the memory of these people, as you see here today. You know, they're not going to be forgotten. Not here, not ever.
Mark, thank you.
Thank you,
Mark Rich. As we just pause for just one moment, and we'll look and listen and appreciate. And of course, when the ceremony begins, we will be sharing it with you. We will not be interrupting. We will enable you to experience this really historic moment. Canada is about to be the only Commonwealth country with 2 unknown soldier tombs. One in Ottawa, and this here in St. John's, Newfoundland and Labrador, and the Commonwealth War Graves Commission has already said it will not happen again. It took years for it to give the approval to have the second because of the distinct war and the distinct war experience of Newfoundland and Labrador from Canada. So we are going to watch together history unfold, and we'll make sure that you as well get to experience it fully. Let's just pause and listen to what is happening here for just one moment. You're watching live coverage from St. John's, Newfoundland, as the funeral procession of Newfoundland's unknown soldier makes its way through the streets of St. John's, approaching now the National War Memorial, which is about to be rededicated, and the unknown soldier placed in a tomb, home at last, after more than a century, buried in an unmarked grave, unknown grave, known unto God, as the headstones read. And there you see HMCS Goose Bay, the sailors on deck, in tribute to what is transpiring just nearby, coming into port of St. John's. 26 ships in port right now. It is a spectacular sight as always, fishing and tourism, supply ships for the oil field, and many military vessels as well, Coast Guard and military, and HMCS Goose Bay sailed in today to pay respects to what we are seeing. Very close. That tent you see on the left, that's where I am. So very close at hand to the harbor and to the National War Memorial. And as you've been listening, just to bring that point, I hope it's a song we hear many more times today. It is so beautiful. Ode to Newfoundland, which is the provincial anthem, written in 1902 by the governor of the day, Sir Cavendish Boyle, and composed by Sir Hubert Parry. You're going to hear the Ennis sisters sing it, along with the beautiful Shalloway Youth Choir. You've been hearing them this morning as well, just an extraordinary choir. They performed it on the 100th anniversary of the Battle of Beaumont-Hamel, and I was here to broadcast for that, and it was absolutely stirring, and you're going to hear it again today. And I'm looking forward to your being able to share in that. Bev Bennett has been with me through all of these conversations and these live pictures. Again, the funeral procession through the streets. Bev is the archivist at the Rooms, which is the art gallery and archives and museum here in St. John's. It is just a beautiful resource, spectacular vista overlooking everything. Bev, you brought in some things that we'll look at over the course of our time together, but this is something I doubt very many people have seen. Can you tell us what it is and explain it?
When a soldier passed away, their family was issued a certificate saying that they died for king and country. They were also each sent a memorial plaque which would arrive in one of these enclosures. And the memorial plaques, because of their shape and size, they also bear the figure of Britannia that appeared on British coins. They became known as death pennies.
Death pennies.
Death pennies.
And that is one. I've never ever seen one before.
So you'll notice that this particular death penny was for Joseph Snow, who was injured at Beaumont-Hamel but died in battle about a year later. And there's no rank on the death pennies because all men are equal in death.
So that would have gone to the families. Terry Roberts was telling me a story, and perhaps we'll get back to it a little bit later in our broadcast, but of how he can remember his grandfather, a picture of his grandfather who came back, but a beautiful portrait in his grandmother's home of his grandfather, not with a death penalty, but he was remembering that so many homes of that time would have had beautiful, huge portraits of the soldier, and then in so many that death penalty.
Absolutely. And we have so many of those beautiful portraits at the Rooms as well, and it's always they always get a little extra care from us just because they're so beautiful and they're so meaningful to so many people.
What are your impressions as you watch all of this unfold today in terms of the
this
significance?
Is absolutely incredible, and it's so moving to see the vision from over 100 years ago of wanting to have an unknown soldier here. And to see that vision realized, but also just to see how many people have turned up today, because it's still so fresh to people. And that is one thing that in, over 20 years of working with people doing research into their family history, if they had somebody who served in the First World War, it's still so known to the families that they come up and say, oh, my great-grandfather was so-and-so, and they rattle off his number as if they just learned it, as if they'd known it. But they just know it from growing up. That
what we're looking at, it, lining several people deep all along this funeral route. You said an interesting thing when we've been speaking leading up to today that, with this upcoming, the reinterment of the unknown soldier, people have been really coming up to you wanting to know things. What have they been what have they been asking you?
They want to know where their great-grandparents were, where their great-uncles were. What did they see? Where did they go? Who were they with? On the day they enlisted, did they enlist with their friends? Who else enlisted that day? So many questions. So many questions.
And do you have that information at the Rooms?
We do. We're very fortunate to be able to share quite often, not only the service record, but quite often other remembrances of people that have appeared in other records, as well as photographs.
They want to know particulars, and yet this is an unknown soldier who will remain unknown.
That's right.
And that's very important. Explain that, if you would.
It's a symbol of hope, I think. It's, everybody wanted to see their person come home. And it didn't happen. And for a number of reasons, it will never happen. And I think that it's really important to have somebody, to have a place where you can go and imagine that you are speaking to that person, commemorating them.
That's so beautiful, because this unknown soldier is meant to represent everyone who served in all branches of service, who fell and who has no known grave. So it could be so many. And they selected this particular unknown soldier because of the challenges in identifying. It was very unlikely that the unknown soldier would ever be able to be identified, even with advanced DNA technology. There was quite a process, wasn't there? Can you give us some information about that?
Sorry about
the decision to choose, because they looked at a number of graves and they were very precise in who they chose.
Yes, I don't know an awful lot about that, but I do know that they don't believe they'd ever be able to narrow it down to less than 138 people, I believe is what the Commonwealth War Graves Commission said, just because of the, over 100 years has passed.
Yes.
And even with advanced DNA testing, it's very difficult to determine at that stage.
Just pause for just a moment, Bev. I'd like to talk more about that with you, but just take in the full measure of this image. Again, as the hearse approaches the National War Memorial, chaplain leading away, Canadian Armed Forces behind, and many Newfoundlanders and Labradorians in St. John's to pay their respects. Live pictures of the hearse now a block away from the Newfoundland National War Memorial. The very solemn procession from the Confederation building, the Royal Canadian Armed Forces Band, various branches of the service, and again, the striking sight of thousands of Newfoundlanders and Labradorians lining that route to pay respects to the unknown soldier. And Bev Bennett and I were just talking about the importance of the soldiers remaining unknown forevermore. And you were saying quite poignantly that you can come and pay respects, and it could very well be a member of your family. I was struck in the pallbearer party, for example, one of those from today's Royal Newfoundland Regiment, one of the 6 pallbearers we will see, he has a relative who fell and is unknown, so he could very well be carrying his own relative in that casket. That's quite a profound connection. Anyone along that route could be watching their own relative pass by. For you, You yourself have a connection to the war.
I do. Fortunately, my great-grandfather survived.
Right.
But I came across his record at work one day, and I was working on the records of all the soldiers, but there was a distance between me and the records. And then reading his name, reading that he'd
What was
been,
his name?
Richard Gleason from Topsail.
Okay, from Topsail.
He was 19 when he enlisted. And suddenly seeing a family name with Gallipoli, Suvla Beaumont Hamel, Goudecourt, and knowing that someone was there, it just brought it really close to home for me. And being able to share those records with the family, it really showed me firsthand how important this is to people.
You're not archivist here. You are great-granddaughter here, talking about the pride of your family. So he fought first in Suvla Bay and then Beaumont Hamel?
That's right.
So we should mention Suvla Bay was Gallipoli, and that was the first action for the Royal Newfoundland Regiment.
It was.
First losses, first battle honors, and then from there on to the Western Front. And the catastrophe that was Beaumont Hamel on the 1st of July, 1916, 108 years ago today. So how does your family keep his memory alive?
Well, once I'd seen his service record and I was able to share it with some family members, they started sharing photographs as well, which has been really nice for me to learn more about.
We've been showing some of them to our viewers, yes.
So it's just been so nice to learn about the history and anybody's recollections. And I hear that in my work all the time. People come in, they tell me about their great-grandfather or their great-uncle, and they say, you know, he never spoke about his time in the war, but this is what we knew about him. And I just love hearing those stories. I really do.
I'm wondering, hopefully there are people outside of Newfoundland and Labrador who are learning about this aspect of our history, perhaps hearing some of these stories for the very first time. But even within Newfoundland and Labrador, some people have expressed to me the time that I've been here this weekend, the concern that people are forgetting, that maybe the regiment, Beaumont Hamel, maybe it's not, I mean, obviously it is very, very, very much written on the heart, but perhaps it's being forgotten somewhat, which may change with the arrival of the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier. What impact do you think that will have in terms of keeping remembrance alive?
For the minute this was announced, we started getting calls at the rooms asking about it. What's happening down there? What is this monument all about? What was Newfoundland's role? And I know that the schools are now developing more curriculum to teach the children more about it, which is going to be incredibly valuable because that's how we pass these stories on.
You know, as we look at this, and I can hear the drums, we can hear the drums. Obviously, they're getting close enough in person. I'm struck by the fact that there might have been scenes, there would have been scenes like this 100 years ago for a memorial to be dedicated, but scenes like this, 1914, when the soldiers went off to war for the first time, Bev?
Yes.
Would they have come out to see them off?
They certainly did. The streets were lined with people watching the soldiers march down the street. The scene right here, the War Memorial location, was actually chosen in part because it overlooks the very scene that would have seen the ships leaving the harbor. And again, it would have seen them coming back, the wounded and those who weren't wounded, anybody who returned.
I mentioned that steamship, the SS Florizel, in October, taking off the first 500, as they were known, through the Narrows and on, and bringing some home, but not all, far too few, including those hundreds who are unknown, one of whom, though, is going to have a final resting place here today. I want to bring in Terry Roberts again. Terry, talking with Bev about 1924 and the scene that drew thousands upon thousands of people for the dedication of the National War Memorial originally. And you have some of the archival material about that and some detail on what has changed. It was a little bit controversial along some of the way, but it is beautiful today and restored to its luster and then some.
Yeah, well, Heather, look, I can't help right now but reflect on what it was like here 100 years ago today. Today, July 1st, 1924, and we can help with that because this is what the organizers have done for us here today. This is a photograph, 100 years ago today. So the first thing that catches my mind are the people on the roofs here and the crowds. We're told 20,000 people, just an immense crowd. And this is only, by the way, 6 years after the end of the First World War. So we know that some of the people in this audience right here, some of the people in uniform are raw veterans of the First World War, very likely still scarred both physically and emotionally from that brutal war, the Great War that we, and I did speak to a nurse, a retired nurse, just yesterday, who used to care for First World War veterans, and she told me what really stood out for her is that whenever she would care for a First World War veteran, their number one concern was their feet. They always wanted their feet to be clean and dry, because we know that the First World War was a trench war. There was a lot of trench warfare, and that's very difficult on a person's feet. So that's what really stands out to me. And I just want to show you something else that stands out to me. I'm just going to clear some of the water off here. That's Field Marshal Douglas Haig. They got him here. He was famous at the time. They raised a lot of money to get him here. It was 100 years ago yesterday that he would have sailed in through the Narrows. And here he is now. The tarp is coming down off of the monument. And something else that really catches my attention is the accessibility to the memorial 100 years later. This is Duckworth Street right here next to me. There's no one on Duckworth Street right now because security. The Prime Minister is here, so obviously security is very heightened. We saw the pictures of people standing on top of the buildings. Well, just look, all we see on top of buildings here today, military, police officers, security cordon. So yeah, as we reflect on 100 years, things have changed, but one thing that hasn't changed is that people still care, people still remember.
Terry, my father attended Earl Haig Secondary School in Toronto. I was thinking about that as you shared that story. And I'm going to pause and I'm going to let all of us experience the moment of the casket being borne from the hearse. I do want people to know the pallbearers who are going to look after this, they are themselves in the Royal Newfoundland Regiment now in the Reserve Force, which is the regiment today. And you have a particular connection to one of these young soldiers. He's been there over in France. He's come with the casket back home to Newfoundland, and he is going to be a key part today. Tell me about your son, Benjamin, Terry, and what he's about to be doing.
Oh, Heather, I didn't know you were going to do this. You caught me off guard here now. No, I'm serious. Look, my son, Benjamin, he's a modern-day member of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment, and he was given the honor to join the bearer party, and he understands what's happening here today because he knows how important this is to everybody. He's read a lot about this. He knows his grandfather. His grandfather might be in this crowd in this picture right here 100 years ago, watching the unveiling 100 years ago. So this is important for our family. I know I'm a journalist, and you try to keep a separation between your story and your own feelings. But this is different today because I'm going to watch him lowering that casket into the burial chamber there, and it's going to be a big moment for my family. Heather?
Your grandfather fought in that First World War, Terry, came home to your family, and there is your son with a very significant part in the ceremony which is about to unfold. Terry, thank you so much. We will watch Benjamin, the other pallbearers from the Royal Newfoundland Regiment. We're just going to pause and let you experience this with us.
Please stand for the arrival of the unknown soldier. Please stand for the arrival.
As the pallbearers proceed and bear the casket to the National War Memorial, you saw a first glimpse there of the granite tomb in which the casket will be placed. There it is there on the right of your screen. And that is the moment that will be the culmination of this ceremony. For more than a century, known unto God, but today, this unknown soldier has come home to Newfoundland.
Lieutenant Colonel John Sampson, CD, Office of the Chaplain General, Canadian Armed Forces.
J'invite le lieutenant-colonel Sean Sampson, aumônier des Forces armées canadiennes, à prendre la parole.
No one can have greater love than to lay down their life for their country. We gather today to bear witness to the end of a pilgrimage which has brought the earthly remains of this Newfoundlander and Labradorian from Europe to this, his final resting place, at this National War Memorial. Let us pray. Lord, you created us not to give death as our ultimate destiny, but to share eternal life with us. Without you, our hope is unfounded, but with you, our confidence in life is limitless. Speak to us now your words of eternal life. Lift us from the anxiety and guilt to the peace and light of your presence, and set before us the glory of your indestructible love, our strength, our shield, and our strong defender. Today, our minds and hearts are with those who gather to witness Newfoundland and Labrador's unknown soldier being laid to rest at this National War Memorial. Hear our prayer as we gratefully and enthusiastically join in the wave of remembrance sweeping across our nation. In unity with all Newfoundlanders and Labradorians and all Canadians of every race, gender, and creed, we offer up prayers of thanksgiving for all those who made selfless sacrifices so that we and future generations might live in peace. Bring your comfort and relief to those who mourn. Enable those who were wounded in body, mind, or spirit to live more peaceful and satisfying lives. Endow us all with a new resolve to hasten that day when war shall be no more. Amen.
Hear the word of God, which was written for our comfort, instruction, and encouragement. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leadeth me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For thou art with me, thy rod and staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
Thank you, Padre Sampson. We will now proceed with the ceremony of interment with the last post, silence and rouse.
Merci, Padre. Nous allons maintenant procéder à la cérémonie d'inhumation. Veuillez vous lever pour la dernière sonnerie, le silence et le réveil.
Please be seated.
Veuillez vous asseoir.
For those that are able, please rise. For the committal, Lieutenant Colonel Sean Sampson, Canadian Armed Forces. Please rise.
Bless and hallow this grave, that it may be a resting place, peaceful and secure, for the body of thy servant, which we are about to commit to thy gracious keeping. Amen.
Please rise for the singing of the Ode to Newfoundland.
Veuillez vous lever, ceux qui peuvent, pour l'hymne de Terre-Neuve, Ode to Newfoundland.
There is a season for everything, a time for occupation under heaven, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time for mourning and a time of dancing, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them up, a time to embrace and a time to refrain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to sow, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace.
Vote.
Our comrade in arms was entrusted to God's merciful keeping. And for as much as it hath pleased Almighty God to receive unto himself the soul of our dear comrade here departed, we therefore commit his remains to their final resting place, earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust, in sure and certain hope of the resurrection to eternal life.
The Royal Newfoundland Regiment is about to fire 3 volleys with blank cartridges. Please protect your ears.
Guards free. Then. Reload. Guard free. Then.
We commend our fallen comrade to your care and keeping. Comfort it that because you love us, none of us lives in vain, labors in vain, gives or receives in vain, or loves in vain, and that without the eternal purpose, each of us is worth more than we can ever calculate. O God, our Creator, Sustainer, and the champion of our noblest aspirations.
Please be seated. $820 forget-me-nots will now be placed on top of the casket in recognition of those from all Newfoundland forces who gave their lives by land and sea in the Great War and who have no known graves.
820 Misiotis seront désormais placés sur le cercueil en hommage des Terre-Neuviens et les Labradoriens qui ont donné leur vie lors de la Première Guerre mondiale et qui n'ont pas de sépulture connue.
Space.
While the temporary tomb cover is being secured, there will be a brief musical interlude. The Ennis Sisters, Shalloway Choir, and the Singing Legionnaires will perform, and the Newfoundland Deaf Choir will sign the song Sing You Home.
Pendant que le couvercle temporaire de la tombe est sécurisé, the Ennis Sisters, la chorale Shalloway et the Singing Legionnaires chanteront Sing You Home. La chorale NF, Newfoundland Deaf, interpréteront la chanson.
When grief invades my soul, there's comfort in a prayer I find. Though these candles honor you, they burn for those you left behind. I'll sing for you. Know that you will live on the lips of those who knew what it was you had to give and what it was we learned from you. This is our prayer for you. Your journey home, or if it helped me let you go. I'll sing for you because I need to. Right now, this is all I know. I'll sing so we will not forget you. I will sing you. We're born unto this earth, generations one by one, ash to ash and dust to dust. There is nothing left undone. I'll sing for you because I need to. Right now, this is all I know. I'll sing so we will not forget you. I will sing you home. I will sing you home. I'll sing for you because I need to. Right now, this is will sing you home.
Lieutenant Colonel Sean Sampson, CD, Office of the Chaplain General, Canadian Armed Forces, providing benediction.
L'aumônier Sampson donnera la bénédiction.
May the God who created us and all humanity instill within you a respect for the dignity of every human being and all of creation. May the God who inspired our comrades to persevere in the face of the impossible encourage you to overcome all the obstacles you will encounter on the path he has traced for you. May the guidance and will of God enable us and all humanity to put aside all hatred and discrimination, all strife, and work together for that day when all people shall enjoy the peace and freedom made sacred by the bloodshed and sacrifice of so many. May God receive the soul of our fallen comrade this day, and may the blessing of God be upon you and those whom you love, both here and in eternity, this day and forevermore. Amen.
Ladies, gentlemen, youth, veterans, and special guests, welcome to a shortened service commemorating the 108th anniversary of the Battle of Beaumont Hamel, July 1st, 1916. July 1st, is both Canada Day and Memorial Day in Newfoundland and Labrador. It is a most poignant day here in our province. On July 1st, 1916, the first day of the Battle of the Somme, the Newfoundland Regiment went into battle. In less than a half hour, after going over the top, 86% of the regiment were killed, wounded, or missing. Despite such losses, the regiment continued to persevere, thus solidifying their impressive reputation. In 1917, King George V awarded the regiment the title Royal in recognition of his exceptional service and sacrifice. This was a unique honor, for no other regiment of the British Army was to have such a distinction awarded to it during the First World War. Today, we commemorate that tragic first day of the Battle of the Somme, when fathers and sons of Newfoundland displayed unprecedented levels of magnificence and unselfish valor. Yet at great cost, the island colony, future province of Canada, relinquished the essence of an entire generation to the horror and waste of war, lest we forget.
Bienvenue à la cérémonie commémorant le centenaire du Monument national commémoratif de guerre de Terre-Neuve. Le 1er juillet est le jour du Canada, mais c'est aussi le jour de souvenir à Terre-Neuve et Labrador. Une journée très poignante dans notre province. Lors de la première journée de la bataille de la Somme, le 1er juillet 1916, 86% des effectifs du Newfoundland Regiment ont été tués, blessés ou perdus dans moins d'une demi-heure de l'assaut. Malgré de telles pertes, le régiment a continué à persévérer et à consolider son impressionnante réputation. En 1917, le roi George V a décerné au régiment le titre royal en reconnaissance de son service et son sacrifice. C'était un honneur unique car aucun autre régiment ne devait recevoir une telle distinction pendant la Première Guerre mondiale. Aujourd'hui, nous commémorons ce premier jour tragique de la bataille de la Somme, au cours duquel les pères et les fils ont fait preuve d'une magnificence et d'une bravoure désintéressée sans précédent. À grands frais, ce dominion insulaire et future province du Canada a abandonné l'essence de toute une génération à l'horreur et au gaspillage de la guerre. Nous ne l'oublierons pas.
The First World War ended with the signing of the armistice on November 11th, 1918. As the armistice neared, the people of Newfoundland and Labrador and their returned veterans wished to properly memorialize the fallen. Under the leadership of Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Nangle, the Roman Catholic chaplain to the Newfoundland Regiment from 1916 to 1919, and with the strong support of the Great War Veterans Association of Newfoundland, the National War Memorial Committee, and community fundraising, the memorial was completed and officially unveiled on July 1st, 1924, by Field Marshal Earl Douglas Haig, former Commander-in-Chief of the British forces during the war. In 2019, the Newfoundland National War Memorial was designated a National Historic Site of Canada for its artistic significance and its association with the poem In Flanders Fields by Lieutenant Colonel John McCrae.
La Première Guerre mondiale se termine par la signature de l'armistice. À l'approche de l'armistice, le peuple et ses anciens combattants retournés au foyer souhaitaient commémorer les morts. Sous la direction du lieutenant-colonel Thomas Nangle, l'aumônier de Newfoundland Regiment de 1916 à 1919, et avec le soutien indéfectible de l'Association des anciens combattants de Terre-Neuve, du comité du Monument national de guerre et la collecte de fonds communautaires, le monument a été achevé et officiellement dévoilé par le maréchal Earl Douglas Haig, ancien combattant des chefs de force britanniques lors de la guerre. En 2019, le monument commémoratif national de guerre de Terre-Neuve a été désigné comme lieu historique national du Canada pour sa signification artistique et son association avec le poème Au champ d'honneur par le lieutenant-colonel John McCrae.
Please stand for the playing of O Canada by the Church Lads Brigade Band. Comrade Gerald Budden, President, Newfoundland and Labrador Command, Royal Canadian Legion, and Corporal Chef Armand Dubois, 444 Combat Support Squadron, Royal Canadian Air Force.
J'invite M. Gerald Budden, président de la Légion royale canadienne, direction de Terre-Neuve et Labrador, et le caporal-chef Erwan Dubois, 444 Escadron d'appui au combat de la Force aérienne royale canadienne, à réciter l'acte de souvenir.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun and in the morning, we will remember them.
Ils ne vieilliront pas comme nous qui leur avons survécu. Ils ne connaîtront jamais l'outrage ni le poids des années. Quand viendra l'heure de l'aube et du crépuscule, nous nous le souviendrons d'eux.
The commitment to remember is recited by Mackenzie Luff in English and in French by Chief Petty Officer 2nd Class Brie LaRoche, 3 Royal Canadian Sea Cadet Corps, Terra Nova.
J'invite Mackenzie Luff et le premier maître de 2e classe Brie LaRoche, 3e corps de cadets de la Marine royale canadienne Terra Nova, à réciter la promesse de se souvenir en anglais et en français.
They were young as we were young. They served, giving freely of themselves. To them we pledge, amid the winds of time, to carry their torch and never forget. We will remember them.
Ils étaient jeunes, jeunes comme nous. Ils ont servi, donnant généreusement leur main. nous leur promettons, en dépit du temps qui passe, de porter le flambeau et de ne jamais oublier. Nous nous souviendrons d'eux. Nous nous souviendrons d'eux.
Reverend Dr. Ian Wishart, CD, Command Chaplain, Newfoundland and Labrador Command, the Royal Canadian Legion.
We gather on July 1st to call to our remembrance July 1st, 1915, the day when the Newfoundland Regiment was almost wiped out. In our service of remembrance, it is our custom to lift our prayers to God or solemnly commemorate in a way suitable to our own beliefs the service and the sacrifice of men and women, young and old, whose lives have been given in service to our country and to our world. We give thanks for the freedom we enjoy, freedom to think, freedom to speak, freedom to choose, and to make choices every day. We remember those who bought that freedom for us, some at the cost of their lives, some at the cost of great suffering. Some we remember all who followed the colors in war and peace. We think of young men and young women who serve today, some far from home, some close at hand, some who serve in danger, some who mourn lost comrades. We remember the veterans of the forces at sea, on the land, and in the air, and those who serve in many capacities, men, women, young and old, Newfoundlanders, Labrador folk, and all Canadians on this Canada's National Day. For July the 1st is Canada's National Day. God bless Canada, this great country, and its people from north to south, from east to west, people whose ancestors have walked these lands for hundreds of years, people who are newcomers from the far corners of the world, people who know this land as their only home, people of every age from youth to old age. May we live together peacefully, one with another, all with all. And let us pray for the peace of the world, for the wise resolution of conflicts. Grant that the people of the world may live by God's Spirit. And now may your blessing, O God, be with us all. We pray in the name of Jesus Christ, and we join our prayers with men and women of many faiths and traditions as we humbly bow before you this day. Amen.
We will now proceed with the laying of official wreaths.
Nous procéderons au dépôt de gerbes. Lors du dépôt, la chorale, accompagnée par la fanfare du Royal Newfoundland Regiment, chantera.
For the unknown soldier of Newfoundland and Labrador, the Honourable Dr. Andrew Fury, MSM, Premier, Newfoundland and Labrador. Wreath Bearer, Chief Warrant Officer Eric Green, MMM, MSM, CD, Canadian Armed Forces.
L'Honorable Dr. Andrew Fury, Premier ministre de Terre-Neuve et Labrador, accompagné par le l'adjudant-chef Eric Green des Forces armées canadiennes, au nom du peuple de Terre-Neuve et Labrador.
Silver Cross representatives. Mrs. Alice Murphy, mother of Corporal Jamie Murphy, 3rd Battalion, the Royal Canadian Regiment, killed in action 27 January 2004. Kabul, Afghanistan. Accompanied by Mrs. Debbie Pinkston, mother of Corporal Brian Pinkston, 2nd Battalion, Royal Newfoundland Regiment, died of wounds. Received in action on the 30th of August, 2010, United States Army, Landstuhl Regional Medical Center, Germany. Wreaths presented by Chief Warrant Officer Emma Stafford, 2652 Royal Canadian Army Cadet Corps, CBS.
Madame Alice Murphy, mère du caporal Jamie Murphy, 3e Bataillon, the Royal Canadian Regiment, tuée le 27 janvier 2004 à Kaboul, Afghanistan. Accompagnée par Madame Debbie Pinkson, mère du caporal Brian Pinkson, 2e Bataillon, Royal Newfoundland Regiment, mort le 30 août 2010, suite de blessures reçues au combat, Centre régional médical de l'armée américaine, Landstuhl, Allemagne. Gère présenté par l'adjudant-chef Emma Strafford, 2652, corps de cadet de l'armée royale canadienne, Conception Bay South. Au nom des maires décorés de la Croix d'Argent.
The Governor-General of Canada, Her Excellency, the Right Honourable Mary Simon, Governor-General of Canada, accompanied by Captain Chris Roy, aide-de-camp.
Son Excellence, le très honorable Mary Simon, Gouverneur général du Canada, accompagné par le capitaine Chris Roy, l'aide-de-camp, au nom du peuple du Canada.
Lieutenant Governor of Newfoundland and Labrador, Her Honour, the Honourable Joan Marie Elward, Lieutenant Governor of Newfoundland and Labrador, Wreath Bearer Sergeant Alexander Batten, 2652 Royal Canadian Army Cadet Corps.
Son honneur, l'honorable Joan Marie Aylward, lieutenant-gouverneur de Terre-Neuve et Labrador, accompagné par le sergent Alexander Batten, 2652 Corps de cadets de l'Armée royale canadienne, Conception Bay South.
Prime Minister of Canada, the Right Honourable Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, accompanied by Major General Paul J. Payton, MSM, CD, on behalf of the Chief of Defence Staff, Canadian Armed Forces.
Le très honorable Justin Trudeau, Premier ministre du Canada, accompagné par le Major général Paul Payton, au nom du chef d'État-major de la Défense des Forces armées canadiennes, au nom du gouvernement du Canada.
Canadian Armed Forces, Major General Paul J. Payton, MSM, CD, on behalf of the Chief of Defence Staff, Canadian Armed Forces, accompanied by Chief Warrant Officer Bob McCann, MMM, MSM, CD, Canadian Armed Forces, Chief Warrant Officer.
Le Major général Paul Payton, au nom du chef d'État-major de la Défense des Forces armées canadiennes, accompagné par l'adjudant-chef Bob McCann, c'est l'adjudant-chef des Forces armées canadiennes, au nom des Forces armées canadiennes.
The Government of Newfoundland and Labrador, the Honourable Steve Crocker, Minister of Tourism, Culture, Arts and Recreation, accompanied by the Honourable John G. Abbott, Minister of Transportation and Infrastructure.
L'honorable Steve Crocker, ministre du Tourisme, Culture, Arts et Récréation, accompagné par l'honorable John Abbott, ministre de la Transportation et Infrastructure, au nom du gouvernement de Terre-Neuve et Labrador.
the Commonwealth War Graves Commission, Vice Admiral Peter Hudson, CB, CBE, Vice Chair, Commonwealth War Graves Commission.
Le vice-admiral Peter Hudson, vice-président du Commission des sépultures de guerre du Commonwealth, au nom de la Commission des sépultures de guerre du Commonwealth.
The Royal Canadian Legion, Mr. Bruce Julien, President, Dominion Command, Royal Canadian Legion, accompanied by Gerald Budden, President, Newfoundland and Labrador Command, the Royal Canadian Legion.
Monsieur Bruce Julien, Président de la Légion royale canadienne, Direction nationale, accompagné par Monsieur Gerald Budden, Président de la Légion royale canadienne, Direction de Terre-Neuve et Labrador, au nom de la Légion royale canadienne.
The youth of Newfoundland and Labrador, Mackenzie Hutchings.
Mademoiselle Mackenzie Hutchings, accompagnée par le premier maître de deuxième classe Bray Larouche, troisième corps de cadet de la Marine royale canadienne Terra Nova, au nom de la jeunesse du Canada.
Please be seated. At this time, recognizing the importance of our historical centennial commemoration and the bringing home of one of ours, we would like to respectfully invite our honored guests to address the assembled. The Honorable Dr. Andrew Furey, Premier, Newfoundland and Labrador.
J'invite l'honorable Dr. Andrew Furey, Premier ministre de Terre-Neuve et Labrador, à prendre la parole.
Your Excellency, Your Honors, Prime Minister, our honored veterans, distinguished guests, my fellow Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. As the 14th Premier of our province, and as an ardent and unapologetic patriot of our corner of Canada, it is my most distinct honor and privilege to be here with you on this somber but most significant occasion. I would like to express my gratitude to those who made this historic journey possible. Mr. Berkeley Lawrence, Mr. Frank Sullivan, Gerald Budden from the Royal Canadian Legion, Newfoundland and Labrador Command, author and historian Gary Brown, the Commonwealth War Graves Commission for allowing the repatriation of our unknown soldiers' remains and for their ongoing care, their forever care of our fallen heroes. The Republic of France for their unwavering commitment to our Allied comrades and their remembrance of their sacrifices in both world wars. Merci beaucoup, mes amis. My colleague, Minister Steve Crocker, my friend, Minister Seamus O'Regan, none of this would be possible without you. And the dedicated support of Veterans Affairs Canada and the Canadian Armed Forces. All of your efforts ensure that the legacy of those who serve, both past and present, will be remembered by future generations. Today, we commemorate the end of a very long journey, one that began over a century ago when England beckoned and the brave men and women of our proud Dominion answered the call. Hundreds of courageous souls from across the Dominion of Newfoundland, some of which who had never been to St. John's, let alone out of our country and across the ocean, to mainland Europe, to the specter of war. I can imagine their excitement and the pride they felt wearing the Newfoundland Regiment badge, marching from the old CLB Armory down past the Basilica to the ships waiting in the harbor. I'm sure the last thing any of them thought was that they will never see these, their pine-clad hills again. But that was the reality for far too many who went. Lost to the trenches, lost in the craters, lost in the horror of war. Now their headstones stand for them, of simple, pale granite, forever engraved with a soldier of the Great War, Royal Newfoundland Regiment, known unto God. But we know them. In memorials and monuments throughout our province, you will find their names, the names of our sons, chiseled in stone and etched forever in our hearts. Honored and remembered today as they have been every July 1st since, every Memorial Day, every Remembrance Day. It's hard to imagine a time when news was not instantaneous, when you only heard of updates by radio, by mail, or by telegram. Imagine not knowing the fate of someone you love so far away from what you know. Imagine coming to terms with not knowing if, when, or how they died, or where they are buried. Coming to realize, finally, they are not coming home. The mothers and fathers, family and friends waiting throughout our small villages and inlets across our country. How hard it must have been. How fear and hope had to wage a battle inside. The not knowing often crueler than the knowing itself. Imagine, if you can, this is one of your own. This all went through my mind as I gripped my son's hand a little tighter, held him a little closer in France as we prepared to receive the body of our unknown soldier. I had the distinct privilege and honor to stand alone with him and my family. No flag, no piper, no bugle, just us. And I reflected on the impact of lost sons and family members. I felt his family's fear. I felt his family's loss. I felt his family's hope to bring him home to Newfoundland and Labrador. A proud member of the Royal Newfoundland Regiment. We don't know his name, but we do know this. He answered the call for king, for country, for this place that we love, for our home, for the freedom we all enjoy today, for all of us. He and many more like him laid down their lives. My friends, he was part of an extraordinary group. Newfoundlanders and Labradorians earned a reputation as the strongest soldiers to step into the muddy trenches across Europe. Bold, courageous, fearless. Being from here, we know this to be our quintessential grit and determination. The fighter that lives deep within all of us. Our soldiers proudly proved their mettle in places like Gallipoli and Monchy-le-Preux. And then there was the horror of Beaumont-Hamel. In the early morning of this day, July 1st, 1916, in less than half an hour, most of the Newfoundland Regiment was wiped out. Of close to 800 soldiers who went into battle that morning, only 68 answered roll call the next day. Some 700 killed, wounded, or missing. The dead included 14 sets of brothers. 100 years ago today, here in what was the dominion of of Newfoundland, in the heart of Old St. John's, this very monument was first dedicated to honor the brave souls we lost. It is said that more than 20,000 Newfoundlanders and Labradorians gathered here for it. The wounds still fresh, hearts still heavy from what was lost. All of them stood where you are standing now. I no doubt believe all of them are with us again today in spirit as we complete the journey for one, but one who represents all. This monument renews the acknowledgement of the valor of our soldiers, their courage, their sacrifice, their enduring spirit that still burns brightly in every one of us. Today, for him, for them, for always, we are all the fighting Newfoundlander and Labradorian. For the families of the fallen, I was proud to serve as next of kin in France. And we are all here today to say thank you, to pay tribute to what you gave, and to honor it by saying in some way, this son, our son, these sons of ours have now come home. For the families of James O'Leary, Harry Hines, and Gerald Walter Eyre, your son has come home. For the families of Robert Mercer, Aidan Devereaux, Aubrey Parsons, Frederick White, your son has come home. For all families who lost a loved one, and for everyone across Newfoundland and Labrador who carries this in their hearts, our son is now home. May you find peace. May he finally be at peace. God bless and embrace the souls of the fallen, and God guard thee, Newfoundland and Labrador.
Thank you, Premier. Her Excellency, the Right Honourable Mary Simon, Governor-General and Commander-in-Chief of Canada.
Son Excellence la très honorable Mary Simon, Gouverneur général et la commandante en chef du Canada.
Good morning and hello. Bonjour. Ullohatsiarti. Prime Minister, Your Honour, Minister, members of the Canadian Armed Forces, veterans, dignitaries, and dear guests. Let me begin by acknowledging the history of this region. Today, we gather on the traditional unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq peoples. As well, I acknowledge the diverse histories and cultures of the Beothuk, Mi'kmaq, Innu, and Inuit of this province. In this way, I hope to honor all First Peoples. This acknowledgement is an example of reconciliation in action, which is a lifelong journey. I am honored to be here with you today to mark the 100th anniversary of the Newfoundland National War Memorial. Today, we also pay tribute to this unknown son of Newfoundland and Labrador, the unknown soldier who has finally returned home. Je suis content d'être avec vous pour cette occasion importante. First, I wish to offer a few words on behalf of Her Royal Highness, the Princess Royal. It is with deep regret that I'm unable to be with you today as you commemorate the brave efforts and sacrifices of the members of the Newfoundland Regiment who went into battle on the first day of the Somme. I have fond memories of joining you in 2016 on the 99th occasion that the people of this island commemorated the Battle of Beaumont-Hamel, and I am deeply saddened that I'm unable to join you again, and I send you my warmest, best wishes on this special day of commemoration. During the First World War, the brave soldiers of the Newfoundland Regiment answered the call to stand with their allies and defend freedom. They served with courage and distinction, and many made the ultimate sacrifice. To this day, we still find their final resting places scattered across the battlefields in Europe. This unknown soldier represents all of those Newfoundlanders and Labradorians who fell in the First World War and whose remains were never identified. Their selfless service will be forever honored here at the Newfoundland National War Memorial. The memorial and the tomb are powerful symbols of remembrance, not only for the families and communities of the fallen, but also for all Canadians who cherish the rights and freedoms we enjoy today. Cette cérémonie aujourd'hui est un rappel de l'importance
reminds us
de
of the
souvenir.
importance of remembrance.
Remembrance is a collective responsibility that we must pass down from generation to the next. Le souvenir est une
Remembrance
responsabilité
is a
collective.
collective responsibility.
When we remember, we preserve an important lesson of history. The cost of war and conflict is too high. We honor every veteran when we work towards dialogue, understanding, and peace. To all our veterans and their families, past, present, and future, we forever owe you a debt of gratitude. À tous nos anciens combattants.
To all our veterans and their families,
Merci.
thank you.
Thank you. Merci. Nakukmik.
Thank you, Your Excellency. The Right Honourable Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada.
Le très honorable Justin Trudeau, Premier ministre du Canada.
Your Excellency, Your Honour, Premier, veterans and members of the Canadian Armed Forces, friends and colleagues, fellow Canadians gathered here today and watching across the country. C'est un grand honneur pour moi d'être
It is
ici
a great honor for me to be here today to mark the
monument
100th
commémoratif
anniversary
national de
of
guerre,
the Newfoundland
ainsi que la mise
National
en
War
terre
Memorial
de la dépouille
and the
d'un
interment
soldat
of the
inconnu,
Newfoundland
Terre
and
Neuve.
Labrador's unknown soldier.
When the First World War started in August of 1914, thousands of Canadians and Newfoundlanders rushed to enlist. They fought bravely, and they showed the world that we could punch above our weight. But many of those courageous soldiers did not come back. We will remember them. Nous nous souviendrons d'eux.
We shall remember.
Today, after more than 100 years, the unknown soldier that was repatriated will lay in his final resting place. This man had a family and loved ones. Maybe he liked to wake up early on his days off just to watch the sunrise here in Newfoundland, home every morning for the first sunrise of North America. Maybe he had promised his spouse that he would come back and that after the war they could build a life together full of the simple things that brought them happiness. The smell of coffee in the morning, the laughter of their kids, skating on fresh ice in the winter. Whoever he was, he fought for our freedom so that we could enjoy the simple things of life that bring us happiness. Today, we brought him home. Aujourd'hui, le jour du souvenir commémore le premier jour de la bataille
Today,
de la
Memorial
Somme.
Day is commemorating the first day of the Battle of the Somme.
À
In
Beaumont-Hamel,
1916, in
des
Beaumont-Hamel,
centaines de soldats du Royal
hundreds of
Newfoundland
soldiers of the
Regiment
Royal
ont
Newfoundland
été
Regiment
tués,
were
blessés,
killed,
ou portés
wounded,
disparus.
or were missing.
Ils ont défendu
They
notre liberté
defended the
à
freedom
tous.
of all of us.
Today, we also celebrate Canada's 157th anniversary. Memorial Day here in Newfoundland and Labrador and Canada Day are interconnected. Because the Canada we know today and celebrate today was built by all the heroes who came before us, all of the great people who helped define and defend our values and our way of life. Some of those heroes fought overseas. Some invented life-saving medicine. Some stood up for what was right in front of historical injustices. What makes Canada the best country in the world is its people. But this country didn't happen by accident, and it won't continue without effort. On ne peut pas tenir la démocratie
We
pour
cannot take our
acquise.
democracy for granted.
On June 28, 1914, the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand set off a chain of events that led to a world war. We must remember the lessons of history. We must be constantly vigilant, defending our values and the institutions that protect them. Beside me, the statue known as the Spirit of Newfoundland holds a torch in her left hand, a symbol of freedom. This memorial was inspired by the famous poem In Flanders Fields by John McCrae. The torch be yours to hold it high. It is the responsibility of all of us to carry this torch of freedom for future generations and for Canada, this country we all love so much, lest we forget.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. President, Royal Canadian Legion, Newfoundland and Labrador Command, Gerald Budden, Royal Canadian Legion.
Distinguished platform guests, veterans, comrades, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you sincerely for your presence and bring you the greetings of Provincial Command of the Royal Canadian Legion of Newfoundland and Labrador. You being here today, you watching from your homes in all areas of our province, you are now placed in a time in history, a time to appreciate that 100 years ago, your ancestors watched in awe as this National War Memorial was dedicated and unveiled in honor and in memory of those who paid the supreme sacrifice. You are also here as a witness to honor and be part of a ceremony of the committal of the remains of a brave son of our province. This unknown son, this hero, this Son of God is now at rest in his native land. The dream of Reverend Father Thomas Nangle, Padre, Lieutenant Colonel, Patriot, 100 years ago, is now complete. For not only do we stand on sacred ground, but we now stand on holy ground, as one of our own Newfoundland and Labrador heroes have returned home and is now laid to rest with such honor and dignity. This hero represents all Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. He was the best that our Dominion of Newfoundland in the First World War was so proud to call their son, their own. He was the one who left mother, father, and family to serve his country in time of war, and who in valor laid down his life for our sovereign, our country, and our democratic way of life. And he is the one today who reminds us 100 years later that the sacrifice of such brave heroes will never be forgotten. God bless him. God bless all those whom we represent. And may God bless our armed forces, our province, and may God protect our nation. Thank you.
Thank you, President, Newfoundland and Labrador Command. Please stand for the benediction. Reverend Dr. Ian Wishart, CD, Command Chaplain, Newfoundland and Labrador Command, the Royal Canadian Legion.
I think it's time to go home. Anybody agree with me? May God bless us. May God's blessing be with you for this day, for the days to come, for this land and for your people. God bless you this day. Amen.
Thank you, Padre Wishart. We will follow your direction. Please remain standing for correction this week. Please remain standing for the playing of God Save the King by the Royal Newfoundland Regiment Band. Please remain standing for the departure of our dignitaries.
How you doing, buddy? It's so good to see you. Very nice. Sorry. It is. Thank you. Thank you. It's all over now. Thank you. You've been wonderful.
Today, we have commemorated the 108th anniversary of the Battle of Beaumont Hamel and the 100th anniversary of our Newfoundland National War Memorial. On behalf of the Royal Canadian Legion, veterans, members of our armed services, and the government of Newfoundland and Labrador, thank you for your attendance and participation today as we remember the service and sacrifices of so many who gave their all so that we may have a peaceful today. Please remember our current and future generations, our history of honor, service, and sacrifice from those that hold the Newfoundland and Labrador. One of ours now at this national memorial is reminded Please remain in place of the Royal Canadian Legion Parade and the Canadian Armed Forces.
The closing thought, lest we forget, Newfoundland's unknown soldier has come home. You've been watching live coverage on CBC News, CBC News Network, wherever you watch CBC Television. And what a privilege to have shared these hours with you as you see the Prime Minister greeting the Silver Cross mothers who placed wreaths, as he did earlier in the ceremony. Struck by the comment of Reverend Ian Wishart, the Provincial Command Padre for the Royal Canadian Legion. He summed it up, it's time to go home. And everyone laughed. But until that moment, no one moved, no one said a word. It was respectful, total silence for hours as Newfoundland paid tribute to its unknown soldier for the burial at the base of the National War Memorial. I've been watching it with you for these hours from St. John's in our location just below the National War Memorial. With me is Beverly Bennett, who's an archivist with the rooms here in St. John's. And we stood, we sat, we were moved. It was very much, I think, as we were expecting. Bev, what stood out for you?
Oh, such a beautiful ceremony. Andrew Fiore's address I thought was fantastic, just really touching. Summed up a lot of what we're all feeling here today.
You know, when he was with us earlier, his role as symbolic next of kin, because obviously the unknown soldier's parents are no longer alive to receive him back home. So he has been the symbolic next of kin, and that is a role that he has embraced. He wrote the letter to them, he wrote that speech, and as you said, it's really summed up, I think, the feelings of the people of his province.
I think so. It's been incredibly moving to be here today. Just a beautiful ceremony.
What was there an emotional high point for you?
Well, I was trying to hold it together when the Ennis singers were, the Ennis sisters were singing. I think a lot of people here were.
Sing Him Home. They have done that in France. They have performed that at the anniversary of Beaumont Hamel at many military occasions with the Chalamet Choir, and it is always so beautiful. You know, I'd like to spend a few moments with you again. The word that people kept using today was ours. You know, one of ours has come home.
Yes.
These hundreds of Newfoundlanders and Labradorians who were lost in the First World War, no known graves, their bodies never found or identified. And this notion of finally being able to bring one of ours home. Let's just understand who those ours were. You know, 1914, when Great Britain went to war and Newfoundland as a dominion automatically was at war.
That's right.
How big was this dominion? How many people were here?
Just over 250,000. And
so a small population.
Very small population. And over the next 4 years, roughly 12,000 men signed up. 3,200 of those served with Canadian and other forces. The rest were here.
It was an incredible response to enlist, and as Frank Sullivan said, one of his images is young Newfoundlanders coming from all parts of the area, on foot, on train, on boat, to come to St. John's to enlist. Why was it so powerful, this notion to serve?
I think there was a deep-rooted sense of duty to the country, to the king, to just do their part. I think Newfoundlanders still very much always want to do their part, and Labradorians as well. You always want to do your part for the country, for your community.
I kept thinking as we were watching that beautiful ceremony of the soldiers sailing on that steamship, the Florizel, in October of 1914, thinking that the war would be over by Christmas.
That's right.
And they'd be right back home.
Yeah.
And of course, hundreds of them fell as they fought. The first 500 they're known as, but they also have this nickname. We haven't talked about this enough today. I'm hoping we're going to be able to show this. The nickname of the first 500, those from the Newfoundland Regiment, the Blue Puttees. And you've actually brought to show me
I've brought
the
some
Blue
puttees that have never been opened.
Never been opened?
Never been opened.
So tell me where they got that nickname.
So when the regiment was very quickly thrown together in 1914, they began training almost immediately, but they didn't have the proper equipment. It hadn't arrived yet.
No khakis.
No khakis. So the khaki puttees hadn't arrived. The puttees to match the khakis hadn't arrived yet. They were quickly given Canadian greatcoats and Ross rifles, which was not what they carried into battle. So for the first few weeks, the first 537 men were issued blue puttees instead of the matching puttees.
So if we were to open that, they'd be long strips of material.
They are.
Right?
They're sort of long, stretchy, similar to a stretchy bandage that we might use if we sprain a knee. And these would be wrapped firmly from the ankle to the knee to prevent injury, dirt, and so on from getting into the boots.
So from that moment on, the nickname, the Blue Puttees, it stuck right through even when they changed.
Absolutely.
Over to Gallipoli, the first battle, Beaumont Hamel. We've talked a lot about Beaumont Hamel because it is 108 years ago today, that catastrophic loss on the fields at the beginning of the Battle of the Somme. But we should also mention there were many moments of significant contribution thereafter.
There were. It was the actions at Cambrai that led to the designation of Royal Newfoundland Regiment. Incredible service from Newfoundlanders and incredible loss.
They were the only regiment to be given the royal designation by King George V because of that contribution. I'm going to tell you one little story because I'd like to get a final thought from you on ours. I was at the Caribou Memorial in Bowring Park, where the Trail of the Caribou begins, this beautiful, peaceful, lush park, and there's this magnificent bronze statue of a caribou. And there's also a big plaque, 800 names of those whose bodies were never found or identified, the unknown, 600 of whom are Royal Newfoundland Regiment soldiers. And a woman came along with her grandchildren, I believe, and she said, come over and say hello to great uncle so-and-so. She went over and she touched his name, gave him a kiss, told them the story. And I spoke to her afterward, and she said she walks in Bowring Park every day. She passes by that site every day to say hello to her great uncle who never came home and is one of those with no known graves. Beautiful. And then she told me about what it was like for her family, this agony of not knowing. Knowing was gone, but not knowing. Mm-hmm. So now there is a little bit of knowing. Can you just speak to that a little bit with the unknown soldier home?
So. I think I've met so many Newfoundlanders, Labradorians who've tried to make the pilgrimage to France to pay their respects. I think we're going to see an awful lot of people here over the next few weeks and months paying their respects here.
You were telling me earlier today, and I think it's an important point to stress, no one wants to know the identity of the unknown soldier. So it could be like you are coming to pay respects to your own. Is that how some will view it, you think?
Yes, I think that everybody wants to have that belief right now. And I've certainly heard from people over the last few weeks saying, oh, I'm going to go down because it could be my great uncle. And it's just a beautiful thought.
It is a beautiful thought. I want to bring in Heather Gillis, who's been with me through the morning too. And Heather, thank you for everything. We were looking a few minutes ago at this incredible scene of Premier Fury, today the next of kin of that unknown soldier, embracing at length Frank Sullivan, Gary Brown. Here we are, we're looking at those pictures from just a few moments ago. Frank Sullivan there. I don't know how he made it through this day. He was so emotional in the lead up to it. But this incredible warmth and gratitude, because these are the men who made this happen over a period of time. Just speak to that a little bit, what we saw, and how this is the culmination of their work and how meaningful it will be to them.
And Heather, they shared a similar embrace at Beaumont Hamel on the day of the transfer, right after the unknown soldier was loaded into a hearse where he was going to be taken to the airport in France, spending his final moments on French soil. Just so meaningful for everyone involved. And I think that lengthy embrace really just shows how meaningful it is to everyone, and it's starting to get me here now. And the ode as well was really emotional for so many people in the crowd. I could hear people breaking out the tissues and sniffling as well. So for everyone here in the province who's gathered here, so many standing here, watching, wondering, could the person who was laid to rest here at the War Memorial today, could that be their kin? Could it be a great uncle? Could it be a great grandfather or a grandfather, depending on your age? So a very emotional time for everyone, but an extra special moment, Heather, for Frank Sullivan and the Premier, who has been acting as next of kin for the unknown soldier.
It was the chaplain, Thomas Nangle, who had this idea of the National War Memorial, who wanted it, who wanted a tomb of the unknown soldier. But of course, those are the men who took up that torch and have made it possible with the Premier's help. Heather, I want to thank you. As I mentioned at the outset, you were there in France for the transfer of the unknown soldier from France to Canada. You were there as it flew across the ocean. You were here as it arrived in Newfoundland and came home, and then for the lying in state and today. Your final thoughts, the lasting images that you'll carry?
Oh boy, that's a hard question to answer. And like so many people who have been following this, it's really hard to put your feelings into words, but it's something that will likely never happen again. So we are witness to history here today.
Heather, thank you for all of the coverage. I want to bring in as well your colleague and mine, Terry Roberts, who has been, again, like Heather, in France and covering this story every step of the way. And Terry, I know we talked about your son, Benjamin. Beautiful to watch him as one of the pallbearers, and congratulations, because that was a very key role, and it was beautifully executed. We talked about your grandfather. I'd like to ask you your closing thoughts as you've watched all of this transpire, the culmination of a very long story for you.
I think I feel how everyone in this crowd feels right now, and that's an overwhelming feeling of pride. And the Premier said it in his speech that he's a non-apologetic, true patriot. And I think most people here are, both as a Newfoundlander and Labradorian and as a Canadian. But, for me, it's about hearing from the veterans who sacrificed and, who gave their all for their country. And there's a man to my left here right now I think you'd rather hear from. And his name is Scott Miller, St. John's, 26 years in the military, been to a lot of hot spots around the world as a peacekeeper and in a combatant role. And it took a toll on your body, but I'm just wondering today, as you see what you've seen here, what's your reflection?
It's one of pride, honor, to be able to witness such an event, to bring home one of our lost sons, and it's emotional. It does, especially with stuff I've experienced. So it's just quite an honor. It's I just can't describe it beyond that. It's amazing.
Right. It seemed to me, Scott, like there were a lot of veterans here today. Did that enhance the experience for you?
It did. It does. I have a lot of friends that I had here personally that I knew, and then veterans that I met, friends of mine, and we all just clicked because we're one group. We've shared the same hardships throughout our careers, and we recognize this as the honor that it was to actually partake in such an event.
I got to ask you, you said this has taken a toll on you physically. Was it all worthwhile?
It was. It's been hard on the body, but I will be honest, I would do it again in a heartbeat. Proud Canadian, proud Newfoundlander, and more than willing to do it again.
So Heather, that's what it's all about right there. Scott Miller, St. John. Scott, thank you very much for your service. Thank you. And Heather, that's it for me here. Thank you very much, and back to you.
No, Well, Terry, I have some more questions for you, actually, if you wouldn't mind. I'd like to share, when we were together, you and I, Terry, the other day, Friday, up at the Confederation Building, and we were doing some live broadcasting as the casket was brought to lie in state. Listening to that conversation with the veteran, I had a conversation with one of the security guards there who himself had done 3 tours in Afghanistan. And he was a big, strong man. And I just, casually said, how do you think Monday will go? And he was immediately overcome with emotion and didn't have any words. He had planned to be here very, very early to have a good seat, but what he immediately did was roll up his sleeve to show me on his forearm, this scriptural passage that he'd had tattooed there. Terry, it was John 15:13, greater love hath no man than to lay down his life for his brother. So as I listen to your talking to veterans and I think of the conversation I had with that man, obviously those who have served would have a particular perspective on what we saw. To have that soldier and that tomb representing all soldiers, all sailors, all those who served in all branches for all time with no known graves, it'll be very, very poignant for them.
It will be, and I'm thinking now about Eleanor Manuel from Twillingate, and hopefully Eleanor is watching today. I met her, a couple of months ago. Her grandfather, one of the unknowns. He went to war in 1914, and his girlfriend was pregnant at the time, and he never came home. And that young boy contributed $1 to this war memorial back in the 1920s. So that's the connections that are here, Heather. And I bought this shirt a few days ago. I went into a men's clothing store here, and I was just talking to the owner, and he asked me what was on the go, and we started communicating, talking, and I told him about the unknown soldier, and I asked him if his family had a connection, and he brought up a name. He wasn't sure about any of the details, and I took out the old Google box on my phone, and before long, I revealed to him that one of those 820-odd unknowns belonged to his family. So there's such a connect. You can go turn around any corner in this province because, like I said, it's a very small province, and the connections are still so strong to that First World War in so many families. So it's the pride. As I said, people are coming by here now, nodding. You can see the pride in everyone's faces here today. This was a huge success.
It was respectful. Such remembrance. I'm loving this opportunity, Terry, as we conclude to share some stories. I have a couple more for you. As we were on the air, I was receiving notes and pictures from people in the province sending me pictures of their relatives' no known grave and how much they were appreciating our coverage. When you talk about connections, one of the very first people I met when I arrived here Thursday was a man who told me about one of his relatives who had gone over the top in Beaumont Hamel, had a silver cigarette case in his chest pocket with 3 Camel cigarettes inside. He was shot. That cigarette case was sufficient to deflect the bullet, so it didn't go into his heart. It was lodged in his body for the rest of his life, but it didn't kill him. And that cigarette case is now an archive, an artifact in the rooms. But again, when you talk about the connections, that's someone I'm going to be thinking about as I remember today. I'd like to get your final thoughts, Terry, on the forget-me-not that you wear so proudly. When I was here for the 100th anniversary of Beaumont Hamel, someone gave me one to wear, and I've kept it in my briefcase ever since. I have it here with me today. I have a new one today. But the significance of the forget-me-not, the flower of remembrance for Newfoundland and Labrador before the poppy. Of course, you wear the poppy on November the 11th, but this is the day for the forget-me-not. What are your thoughts, Terry, when you pin that on and when you look at it?
Yeah, well, there's been a revival of the forget-me-not because pre-Confederation, this was our symbol of remembrance, dating back to 1917, the year after Beaumont Hamel. And as we entered Confederation, the poppy emerged as, the more prominent symbol of remembrance. But now this forget-me-not is right there now with the poppy, and it's the revival is and again it adds. It just makes you feel so much more proud of the legacy of this place, which was once, as we said, a self-governing dominion of the British Empire. We created our own laws here. We had our own legislature. We were on par with Canada, Australia, New Zealand. But the First World War, the cost of building a railroad, the collapse in the cod fishery, those things just changed the course of this place. We lost our independence, and eventually it led to Confederation with Canada, which I think you would say most people are so grateful that happened. Everyone here, I can guarantee you, are very proud to be Canadian, even though there was a good discussion about the fact that the Canadian flag was dressing that casket. But, there was a Newfoundland ensign in a flag, in a frame on top of that casket. The Newfoundland government flying the Newfoundland ensign on a courtesy pole outside Confederation building. So there's a lot of respect and a lot of understanding for a little bit of a complicated history that we have here. And I think people really appreciate that. We know that a Canadian soldier cannot carry a casket unless it's it's being dressed with a Canadian flag. So there were all kinds of rules and regulations that has to be followed, and that's how it is. And then again, special dispensation was given for the soldiers here today to salute the ode to Newfoundland. That's not permitted ordinarily, but here it happened today. So, hats off to everyone from the military to Veterans Affairs to provincial officials and to the, I would guess, $13 million that was spent to make all this happen right here, because there were expropriations done. There were, the whole grounds were refurbished here. There were new infrastructure, underground infrastructure done here. And this viewing platform right here, I can't wait to do a Freedom of Information request on this. I would assume, I bet you $200,000 that it costs taxpayers to put this viewing platform right here. So again, it speaks to something, doesn't it? It speaks to how we remember and how we appreciate those who serve this country.
Terry, you're just chomping at the bit to get back to your normal job, but what an extraordinary journey you have been on in covering this, and I appreciate your insight. Somebody dropped off not just a pin, but an actual bouquet of Forget-Me-Not for me here at our broadcast location. I'm so grateful because I had written down one of the stanzas from the 2010 folk song, "Forget-me-not, we flower of beauty, your royal symbol proudly stands, blue as the loyal men that wore them, far from their homes in Newfoundland," the Forget-Me-Not. So, the National War Memorial, as Terry said, it has stood here in downtown St. John's for 100 years. And as you've seen, it will go into the next century looking much the same, refurbished, refreshed, but the same, timeless, except one critical addition today, that tomb for one man who will now come to represent so many. For Terry, for Heather, for all of our guests, Beverly Bennett, I want to thank you for being part of this extraordinary morning. I'd like to acknowledge as well our broadcast teams, both here in St. John's and in Toronto. Let me tell you, they work tirelessly to enable you at home to experience these historic events. This is a moment that no one in Newfoundland and Labrador will ever experience again, and they have today with you, and I want to thank you for joining us. For me, it's certainly been a moment I won't soon forget. So many powerful images, and not the least of which, that Forget-Me-Not. The Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, the journey of this one soldier is over. And as the Premier wrote to the family in the capacity of next of kin, for the first time in more than 100 years, your boy is now home.